Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Miller Talk podcast. I'm your host, Austin, and today we'll be talking to Rory, who is from the UK, and I met him on X. Would you like to say hi, Rory?
Hi, hello. Uh, I don't really know what to say because obviously it's like I've not done something like this before,
Yeah,
but it's a pleasure to meet you and be here and to talk. I do love
yeah,
chatting random stuff to people, so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
yeah. Um, it's good to have you on, and I'm glad you come on because, I've talked about this before on previous episodes, but it is kind of hard to find people because a lot of people seem to think that they're going to they think that they're the person that's going to make me famous. They're going to make my podcast famous or something, and that's not even why I do this
Mm.
podcast. I just do it for fun.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
they're kind of self-centered people and whatever. Um, but so we
Yeah.
met on X, and the reason why I found you interesting in the first place was because you said you were from the UK and you had changed your mind about gun ownership, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember exactly what post I was referring to, but Uh, yeah, I've definitely been red pilled, I guess
Mm-hmm.
is the expression, like with regards to that. I mean, as I mentioned to you before, obviously for the purpose of the podcast, I'll
Yeah.
like break it down, but it is difficult to explain uh, a UK perspective to an American, and I wouldn't say the UK is typically like representative of like the sort of opinion outside of the states, but um, perhaps it's more closely aligned to that than say uh, what the opinion is within the states. And what I mean by that is that the UK is very anti uh, gun ownership
Mm-hmm.
for a variety of reasons, some with which I agree with and some with which I don't.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that that sentiment is as strong, sort of like globally. I mean, I can't say for sure, but the sort of feeling I get is that it's it's not as strong as what the UK is in terms of anti-gun ownership,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have. But I still think it aligns. Like the UK's sort of general sentiment aligns more closely with the sort of global idea about it than what the US idea about it, which is
Yeah.
obviously it's quite polarizing there, isn't it?
Oh yeah. It's very, very polarized
Mm.
in the states here.
Yeah.
Very, you
Um,
can get in very heated arguments about it.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For sure. It
and
is a prickly, like, emotive topic for sure.
yeah, because a lot of people seem to think that just because someone misuses something, that we should automatically assume other people are going to misuse it.
Yeah.
And what you have
Yeah.
to really realize, though, is that a gun is just a tool. It's no different than a hammer. And what you can do with a
Mm.
hammer is you can build a house or you could hit yourself in the head with it. So,
Yeah.
it's up to the person. And that's why our founding
Def-
fathers wrote the Second Amendment the way they did. A well regulated militia is necessary to the freedom of the state. And well
mm.
regulated back in the day didn't mean regulation as in government regulation, it meant well trained. So everyone
Yeah.
should be armed, but they should also be well trained with
Yeah. Yeah.
their arms. And arms, the reason why they said arms was because they meant anything that you could defend yourself with, not just
Mm-hmm.
guns, or else they would have said muskets.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
surpasses any technological advancement that comes to arms.
Mm. And I think, like, well, I think Charlie Kirk said something. I was watching some sort of Charlie Kirk
Mm-hmm.
YouTube episode a few weeks ago, and I wanted to watch it before this just so I could actually directly quote exactly what he said. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do that. But he said something like, like there is a price to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
There is a price to sort of like liberty.
Yep.
And if somebody brings up sort of like mass shootings or just gun crime in general, he's like, well, that is actually a price that you pay for freedom. And he put it in a much more sort of uh, sort of detailed manner than what I have there, but I do actually agree. I do
Mm-hmm.
actually agree with that principle. And perhaps as I've got older, I've seen, especially now, like with like the political environment and stuff, it's genuinely insane
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in your country and my country and across like the Western world. To be quite honest, it is
Mm-hmm.
actually insane.
Oh yeah.
And there are things happening daily that just demonstrate like the fact that there are either rogue elements within government or just rogue governments in general who
Mm-hmm.
do not have their interests at heart, and will use like sort of methods that you could deem as like authoritarian or totalitarian to
Oh
sort of
yeah.
suppress you in a number of different ways. Like there's so many examples of that now. So going back to what you said about sort of it being a way to sort of combat that. Perhaps that wasn't, we got to a point in society where, especially liberal people, where they felt like so comfortable that that didn't seem appropriate, like it didn't seem like it applied. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're seeing actually like that it does apply. It actually does apply.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there are other reasons why I think that gun ownership in the States is um, necessary, and potentially more necessary than what it is in the UK. But for that reason that we just discussed about sort of potentially tyrannical governments and uh, departments within governments or rogue actors within those departments, I would actually support gun ownership potentially,
Mm-hmm.
like in the UK as well. I mean, our government right now is um, like as I'm a white English guy. Like
Yeah.
I guess my ancestors, my heritage is white British. Like we genuinely are like under attack. Like whether people
Oh
want to
yeah.
dismiss it or say that that's hyperbole, it's actually not. Like there are laws in the country now, um, which if I committed a crime, um, I'd be judged more harshly than pretty much every
Mm-hmm.
other uh, group, like that's women, any other like so-called ethnic minorities, which I think I kind of reject that term anyway. But
Yeah.
um, like any religion, any sort of group that you can sort of like whittle it down to, like white British white men that are straight are actually potentially would be charged in a harsher way than any of those other groups, and that's like in law here.
Oh yeah.
So like that's genuinely insane
Yeah.
what's
I
happening
saw
like in a
that.
Western democracy. That's crazy.
Yep. Like I don't keep up with British politics, obviously, but I
Yeah,
did happen to see that, and I thought that was crazy,
yeah,
wild,
it's wild.
crazy.
Hmm. And I mean, I was actually thinking about this yesterday like after we discussed me coming on and just having a
Mm-hmm.
chat with you, and I was like, I wonder if maybe the UK is worse than the US. But then I thought of like all of your sort of issues where like the government have sort of utilized like federal sort of authorities or federal departments and stuff to like punish like sort of outspoken people or people. Basically, they're using the law sort of to like punish their political opponents and stuff. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the US is worse than the UK, but then there's just so many examples from each country
Yeah.
where I just think we're both in a really terrible place in terms of like the polarization,
Yeah.
in terms of like I do genuinely believe that one side is maybe um, I don't want to say brainwashed, but for lack of a better term, like it kind of does feel like that. It's very cultish on the sort of left side these
Mm-hmm.
days,
Yeah.
and I think that that is gonna potentially lead to the demise of like what is like the most progressive, prosperous uh, societies that have ever existed, pretty much, which isn't a good thing. So
Yeah.
Obviously, I oppose that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah,
They've been using lawfare on Trump for a while, um,
mm,
to try and suppress him, and none of it's ever worked. It hasn't worked yet. They've sent him to prison, but
yeah,
then they dropped the charges shortly after the election, after he won. Um,
yeah. Saw that. Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to be exposed to U.S. politics, but
yeah.
when you sort of start leaning into politics, you can't help but, especially being from the UK, it's obviously different for you because like the US has such a massive like cultural weight to it, like
Mm-hmm.
especially in like the Anglosphere where we speak the same language as you. So like all of the sort of different organizations, I don't know, like you just culturally like the states is so big that we can't help but be exposed to what's happening
Yeah.
over there. Whereas obviously not really the same for you with the UK. You might
Mm-hmm.
pick up different snippets of information depending on what goes viral and whatnot on, say, X. But in
Mm-hmm.
general, you're not going to be as informed about UK politics as, say, what I would be about US politics. But I
Yeah.
think US politics as well, it's, it's not just about that, it's also about the importance that it has. Um, it does influence global politics.
Mm-hmm.
It does influence individual countries.
Yes.
We're kind of downstream from you in that sense, in a lot of ways. Not every way. Sometimes you're actually downstream from us, but in most ways, I would say what happens in the States kind of happens in the UK maybe a few years later.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'd like to think that that's happening like politically as well, but I'm not sure. Like, I'd like to think there would be like a sort of rebound in terms of like conservatism and traditionalism with the
Mm-hmm.
government and with like culture and stuff. But there are differences between the countries, which
Yeah.
lead me to think that that actually isn't really going to happen for the UK. I'm pretty pessimistic about the UK's future.
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all are a lot
But
further down the creek than we are because
mm,
we have protected rights. And do you guys have like a Bill of Rights at all that says these are your
um,
rights and the government is not
it's
supposed to?
it's yeah, I don't think it's as well known and as well sort of like it's not as clear and concise as say what the American one is. And there seem to be a lot of laws that sort of undermine it, or undermine those sort of basic laws that
Mm-hmm.
you think would be sort of like the foundation for everything else, and it doesn't really seem like that here. I mean, your free speech laws, for instance, are like so much more clear cut and
Mm-hmm.
fundamental, um, to your law and just to your country and to your culture that, than ours. It's just absolutely not even debatable, to be honest. And obviously, then you've got like your amendment and stuff like
Yeah.
that, which we don't have. So yeah, we don't have those like that sort of safety net,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is why we see like what's happening now. Um, which again is, I guess, going back to the gun thing, is sort of
Yeah.
why potentially I'd support gun ownership in the UK. It is more complex than that.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the reasons I would advocate for gun ownership in the States, that so when people look at it over here, right,
Right.
the main opinion that sort of the main reason, the main source that people build their opinion on gun um, laws and gun ownership would be from news on mass shootings,
Mm-hmm.
genuinely, and like then just the raw data on gun crime, but they wouldn't actually drill down into the data itself. So
Oh yeah.
uh, that's literally those two things: mass shootings and just the raw data, just the top, like the very surface level data, but no sort of granular sort of assessment of it. Is how people build up their opinion on gun laws over in the States, or gun ownership over in the States. And so they're like, well, we don't get mass shootings over here, so therefore I'm against gun ownership, kind of thing, because it's ridiculous. There's like
Hmm.
a correlation between gun ownership and gun crime, this, that, and the other. And to some extent, I agree that there is a correlation, um, but what they don't do is they don't take into account like the wider context of the culture, the history, the background, the sort of literally everything. There's it's multifactorial in that sense. There's so much that goes into it uh, that isn't just as simple as saying like, oh, there's a mass shooting, ban guns, that will not happen again. Kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's not that simple, not in my opinion anyway. And I could go into more detail, but I think,
Yeah.
say for instance, if you're a policeman, we don't have armed police here.
Yep.
Like regular policemen are not armed, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they don't need to be because the population isn't armed. So like if I was a
Yeah.
policeman and I pulled somebody over in a car, there's actually not really a threat of me getting my face blown off in the UK because there's whereas that actually happens in the States. So like the police do need weapons,
Mm-hmm.
which means the stakes are raised because obviously you can a gun is like a tool that can make a killing of something or somebody more efficient. Um, so like the stakes are inherently like massively raised, which kind of also then feeds back into mistakes. Like if you make a mistake as a policeman over in the UK, it might not lead to the loss of life because you don't have the tools to do it. Whereas in the States you do, but we kind of already established that there also is a requirement to have weapons because if they don't have weapons, they're just their lives are potentially at risk. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think it's a lot more nuanced than the regular sort of normie over in the UK would have you believe, where they're just like mass shootings. Oh, that's it. That's literally the only way that they form their opinion.
Yeah.
They don't look into the history or the sort of gun distribution or yeah.
Yeah.
Crime rates and crime
Grok says
relations.
there's been 7 mass shootings in the UK since the 2000s.
Okay.
The most
Um.
recent one was the Plymouth shooting on August 12th, 2021, where 5
Oh yeah.
people were injured.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, killed
Like
5 people, injured 2 before taking his own life.
yeah. Which obviously he's like a disgusting, despicable human being.
Mm-hmm.
Um. It's like you said. It's a tool like anything else that
Yep.
um you can use it in a number of different ways. It's how you choose to use it,
Yeah.
and that then comes about from like morality and education, and
Mm-hmm.
um, then that's obviously a wider topic that people don't necessarily want to discuss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in some ways, I get it. In some ways, I do get it. In some ways, I do get it. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, but in some ways, like I said, I'm 100% an advocate for it in the States. I don't know if I'd want it here, but it's because we don't have them here, so we don't necessarily require it.
Yeah, you don't have them there legally, but obviously
No,
it's still possible for people to get them
to get them,
illegally.
yeah. And if that
Um,
was what happened in more widespread, then I'd say we need gun ownership. And I guess to counter my point would be that there is a potentially tyrannical government or deep state within the UK as well that doesn't have my interests or my family's interests or
mm-hmm.
my loved ones' interests at heart. So that would be one reason why I would potentially advocate for the UK.
Yeah.
Advocating it for the UK, I'd probably be 50-50. Advocating it for the States, I'd be 100% in favor.
Mm-hmm. So
Um,
this guy killed 5 people and injured 2 and then took his own life. What do you think the chances of him being successful? Obviously, it's bad to say he was successful, but being successful in his attack,
I know.
if
I know what you
every
mean,
person had a gun and was well trained with it.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if you'd like the answer, but I still think it would be relatively high.
Yeah.
But then I guess that that kind of is a price of freedom.
Mm-hmm. There's
um,
freedom
to
comes with
accept.
responsibility.
It does, yeah, it does. And like, I'm not saying I justify it. I don't condone it. I wish it didn't happen. I wish innocent people didn't get killed, like or slaughtered like that in any situation, obviously. Like, you know, but it's kind of like there are wider issues
Mm-hmm.
that we as a society and as a race like need to address, and like I think we'll potentially get there eventually if you know what's happening now sort of ceases to exist and we can carry on working towards like human progression, because I don't see the like left wing parties working towards that anymore. But like if
Mm-hmm.
we can continue that sort of trajectory which we have for pretty much most of history, I do think we'll get to a point where, you know, people will have guns and we won't have these issues, because there will be a more understanding of why people commit these crimes. Like there will be potentially better uh, tests in place to prevent, because obviously you can have gun ownership, but at the same time there are some people that you don't want to have guns. It's a bit like the whole nuclear thing
Yeah.
with Iran at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, America isn't bombing the UK or France because it understands that they're responsible nations that can actually have nuclear power, or like they can have nuclear weapons because they're not a threat. You know, they're not dangerous, they're not volatile. Whereas like Iran isn't. And in the same sense, like, you know, with guns, it's a similar thing. Like you can, there are people that you still don't want to have guns. I wouldn't say it undermines the whole Second Amendment completely, but there are some people that genuinely shouldn't get them. And like once we get to a stage where we can sort of like weed out the people that can, and we understand the psychology and stuff behind it and the science behind it, and there's probably other like scientific advancements that we can make to like sort of aid that, then
Mm-hmm.
you know, we potentially would get to a society where like people can have guns, um, and we don't have these issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I see where you're coming from. And one of the biggest arguments I get into, even with people who agree with me that are Second Amendment advocates, pretty much an absolutist. I believe that
Hmm.
everyone should be able to own guns.
Yeah.
So a lot of them, one of the laws that we have in America is felons aren't allowed to own guns. And I tell them that they should be able to own guns, because to me, the Second Amendment is not just writing on a piece of paper that says you're allowed to own guns. It is an inherent right given to all people by their creators. Um,
Okay.
that was written in the Declaration of Independence. But so the reason why I believe felons should be able to have guns is because what you're doing is you're continuing their punishment after they get out of jail. If that person went to jail and they were rehabilitated, served their time, why do they not be able to own a gun? And so people will then say, well, because they're dangerous and they shouldn't have a gun because they're a felon, they committed a crime. Well, then why did you let them back on the street? If they're still
Okay.
dangerous, why are they on the street?
I mean, I actually understand your perspective there, and to be fair to you, I think that is a valid point. I'm willing to, you know, like this position that I have at the moment, like I'm not completely set on it. Like if somebody
Mm-hmm.
comes at me with a new perspective or a new idea that I haven't considered, you know, I potentially would change my mind. I guess then the question would be like, are there, if you're back, if you're out from prison,
Mm-hmm.
is there like a middle point to sort of like being back in free society?
Yeah, you do go on
Because like
probation.
we've so if you're on probation, does that count? What does that mean? Is that like how would you sort of differentiate between being in prison and being out of prison in terms of relative to like you staying as like a free person and like the Declaration of Independence and all of that stuff? Like, sorry, all of your rights. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
How would you sort of like differentiate between those two systems, like of being in prison and being out? What's the
So
difference? And are there middle grounds? Are there bits in the middle that are more of a grey area?
yes, so that we have, there's a complicated prison system, and then once you get out of prison, sometimes depending on the crime, people will go to halfway houses where they're basically only in prison at night and on the weekends, but
So
they're
so
allowed to go
so I
out
guess
during the day and work,
so would
but they're
those
still
people
monitored.
Would you say that those people could own guns?
Yeah, I believe if they're in society, operating within society, they should be able to own guns because they need to be able to defend. That's what I believe the Second Amendment is for: is defending your life.
So you not, in your opinion, like I'm not. This isn't necessarily because I don't understand or relate to your
Mm-hmm.
position. I'm just sort of trying to get to
Yeah.
like what this means. It, are they not necessarily a part of society then if they're in prison?
Yeah.
Is that
When
what you're
when
saying?
they're when they're in prison,
you wouldn't advocate for them to own weapons in prison, right?
no, no, not in prison because in
But only
prison
when they
things
get
are
released.
controlled. I used to work in a prison for a short period of time, and things are very controlled inside the prison.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then
But do
you
you
will
think
know.
there's a place for like a middle ground between prison and just being free in society? Or so I guess because I mean not necessarily as a felon, but like what if somebody had like schizophrenia or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they were in society, they weren't in prison or they weren't in like a mental institution, but they were monitored because it was like I don't really know like what part of sort of the like where they'd be held or like if because these things are really complex. Like some people probably
Mm-hmm.
are in homes and they do have like people that left out, but they go back in and they log in daily or whatever. There are different sort of ways to do it, but so if there was a schizophrenic that maybe it wasn't so severe that they were in a mental hospital, but they were monitored or they had to check in daily, they're kind of like in that grey area where they're like
Mm-hmm.
they're in society, but they're not fully free in the sense that like it's kind of some aspect of their lives are controlled. So for that example, for instance, would they, in your opinion, be allowed to have guns, or is it just people in prison like that are actually controlled, like outside of society?
Yeah, I mean that is kind of hard because I do understand that there are some people that are very mentally unwell. But then it comes back to like what I said earlier about the mass shooting. If that person decides to use his firearm incorrectly, then everyone else should be armed and well trained in order to stop that person from doing anything. And
Yeah.
obviously they're not mentally well in the head, so they're probably not going to be thinking, "Oh, I'm about to walk into a place where everyone is armed." So when I start go shooting people, because at the end of the day, some people, like most of these people who do these mass shootings, they kill themselves when they're done. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're not really worried about themselves dying, and most of the time, it's kind of a way of suicide. So it does
Yeah,
kind of
where they
also
can't
go
deal with the
back to,
consequences of what their actions, kind of thing.
yes, it kind of goes back to what you were saying with Charlie Kirk. Bad things are going to happen, and we have to take the bad with the good because there's no amount of legislation that's just going to make evil disappear.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I agree with that. I just, I think there are specific um, examples or incidences where like I guess I wouldn't be an absolutist then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I'm still definitely more pro Second Amendment um, than I would say 99% of Brits.
Yeah.
Uh, and in the context of the states, it's just like a no-brainer for me. But I guess that's not an absolutist position in the sense that I do think that there would potentially be a case for some people to be controlled, but they're not in prison, which means some of their freedoms are curtailed. Like some of them are restricted because uh, it's not that they're necessarily malevolent people,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, like they're maybe at a higher risk of making the wrong decision
Yeah.
with something that could cause like significant harm to people very quickly and very easily. So I, I guess I'm probably I would probably buy into your argument with the felons. To be honest,
Yeah.
like I could probably accept that. I do think again that there are probably some felons that shouldn't, but then you could make the argument that they shouldn't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
be free. But I
Yep.
do think that there will be some middle ground between prison, where everything is controlled, to society where everything is to open society where everything is free. I do think there is some grey area in between in that you know
Hmm.
we could limit that grey area, and some felons could just be in the open society and they could have weapons. But I think that there is still going to be a small percentage that do go into the grey area that perhaps should have some of their freedoms um, restricted, and one of those probably would be gun ownership. For me, that would be my
Yeah.
perspective. But
Okay.
um, so I think like I could sort of come over to your side in some some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
Like let's say 50-60% agree with you,
Yeah.
but then in some ways I'd have to like hold that position in the middle, like because I think I don't necessarily agree that every single incident like people should have weapons,
Yeah.
but I mean
So.
there might be a something that you say now that's like actually
Mhm.
changes my opinion. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, okay, I'm fully on board.
Yeah. So we say, we'll say that the schizophrenics, they're very mentally unstable. We say they can't own guns. Well, what's
Hmm.
the next step? No knives, no cars, no hammers, no, like, they just don't get to own anything. So they just don't,
Mm.
at that point, they just need to be in jail, right?
Um, no, I see what you're saying. So I guess again, like you'd have, would you be sort of analyzing it on such a granular level
Mm-hmm.
that you'd be looking at every different object that they could get hold of, and would you
Yes.
have laws and legislation
Yeah.
and
Because
stuff?
I will say, like, a gun is the most efficient way to commit violence, but there's still very many other ways to commit violence.
Yeah.
So you would have to restrict them to the point that they might as well just be in jail, or else they're still going to be able to commit
Or
violence if
or in
they want to
hospital.
do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So what we're saying is that like you could potentially have like some sort of test that would like, I mean, let's say they, I'm not saying there is a test or we could devise a test, but
Mm-hmm.
if we could have a test to say like what do we think their like sort of propensity is to commit this sort of crime, like whether they mean it or not, it could be a felon or it could be somebody that's really mentally unwell. But if it comes back and it says actually they pretend, they do have a relatively high chance of doing this, then I guess you'd keep them out of society,
Mm-hmm.
until the point where they're not. And then anybody that does say pass that test would be able to go back and just
Mm-hmm.
have the same freedoms as everybody else. Maybe I agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't know though, man, because like
Yeah. I know it's hard.
you referenced vehicles. It's
Mm-hmm.
like if some people have medical conditions that they're not allowed to drive. They
Yeah.
can't get insurance because I don't know, they might black out or they might have a seizure or an epileptic fit or something. And it's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
is that restricting their freedoms? It is, but it's also kind of like common sense. So
Yeah.
like, I don't know, man. I feel like absolutism is morally and principally right.
Mm-hmm.
So like from a moral standpoint, I kind of agree with you. Like I
Yeah.
don't really think I do have any leg to stand on to argue against that. But from like
Mm-hmm.
a logical, rational, nuanced standpoint, I think I think there's more to it than that. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not that black and white.
Yeah.
Like in a utopia, in like a perfect society where everything else is not necessarily a perfect society, but in a society that has reached a level of enlightenment that like and like a level of technology or a level of like sort of harmony, then I think you could potentially apply your sort of worldview without
Mm-hmm.
any real problems. But like we are in like a really terrible society,
Mm-hmm.
where like loads of parts of it don't work correctly.
Yeah.
And I think that makes the situation more nuanced to the point where like I don't know if I could totally endorse your absolutism. Like I'm trying to come over to you because you made some
Mm-hmm.
good points and I
Yeah.
kind of do agree with them, but and like I
Yeah.
yeah, you're probably right. Like you or like I was right in that you probably could do a test, and if they are gonna fail that test or whatever, then they're not actually fit for a free sort of society.
Mm-hmm.
I still would argue that there's probably some grey areas which you just
Yeah.
account for, and like
Mm-hmm.
you kind of do need to have some restrictions in place for some freedoms. But like I'd be okay with that, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, as long as like the the laws around that would be um
Yeah.
not they wouldn't be open to sort of like manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yep. That's where you get to, and that's basically a question I was going to ask you: is who's doing that test and who gets to administrate it and who gets to
Yeah.
determine the level of schizophrenia
Hmm.
or the level of mental illness? Because one of the
Yeah,
biggest
I'd
things
agree.
that's
Yeah.
happening in the US right now are these things called red flag laws.
Hmm.
In California, Colorado, New York, all the big left leaning states, they have these red flag laws that basically say anyone is allowed to go report someone because they believe them to be too mentally ill, mentally unfit to own a firearm. And then what
Right.
happens is, without a trial by their peers, where they're not even allowed to come to this trial, um, the government can just come in, bust their door down, no knock warrant, and take their
Yeah, I see
firearms.
what you're saying. Yeah, so it's like a de facto law that undermines the Second Amendment without any recourse at all. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
like you can't. Yeah, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I see what you're saying. Is the solution to make the law clearer and sort of account for like these people that would manipulate it to sort of suit their own agenda? I don't know if the solution would
Mm-hmm.
be to make more laws to try to sort of like to try to police the law, you know,
Yeah.
because like that's part of the problem is like the law needs to be it can't be interpreted. It needs to be exact. You know, you can't like you can't have different
Mm-hmm.
interpretations of the law. The law needs to be um I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example like that would be really clear. Don't jump off this bridge, the kind
Yeah.
of thing. And like if you jump off it, you can't like interpret that in any other way than like you've jumped off the bridge kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
there's no other. It needs to be like foolproof. And obviously, clearly, that red flag issue that you brought up is being manipulated and used sort of for like political reasons, and
Yep.
that isn't right. Um, yeah, I'm not too sure because then obviously you add more laws, it gets more complicated, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Once there's too many laws, lawlessness becomes commonplace.
mm, mm. No, it's a difficult one. I'm unsure,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest. I'm actually
Yeah.
unsure.
The thing is, we
Um,
can't guarantee that tyranny will never arise. So when we
exactly,
make
yeah.
these laws, we have to remember that someone who doesn't like me or interprets it in a different way has the ability to use
Mm. Yeah, no,
it.
I agree. I do agree with you, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
problem because then you could say that like because in my head I'm sort of thinking like we need as like a culture as a society to get to the point like I'm not saying we all have to agree on everything,
Yeah.
but would be that sort of homogeneity of like thought and understanding probably is better for like a stable society. So it probably would benefit people to have like those similar values and stuff. And like, uh, I guess like what I'm getting to is that like we need to get to a place in society where um, we we can trust people to not
Mm-hmm.
uh, make those. We can trust people not to become tyrannical. We can trust people not to interpret it in such a ridiculous way.
Yeah.
But maybe that is just too utopian. Maybe that like
Mm-hmm.
humans just have inherent flaws that we have to control, and like to do that is like sort of in the way that you're saying. So uh, maybe I'm on board with you. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'm on board with you. But then I guess that then we still need to have. Yeah, I'm not too sure, man. I'm really
Yeah.
not too like
Yeah.
because
I don't mind disagreeing with you, and that's why I
well, no,
like this podcast. Is and like you said, you're coming to an agreement with me, but it's just as long as we can come to good faith and realize like I'm not trying to
Hmm.
beat you in this. I'm just giving you my interpretation, and then I'm listening to
Exactly the
what you
same.
say and your interpretation of it. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
for
fine if
sure.
at the end of the day you come to an agreement where you're like, okay, I'm not an absolutist, and
Hmm.
I still believe, okay, maybe some people shouldn't have firearms, and that's okay. And I just take this absolutist stance because if no one takes it, then you know someone has to stand up at the end of the day and say, no, I would like if I was a senator or in the House of Representatives, um, I would be the type of person that would, no matter what the gun control is, I'd always vote no on it. Someone has to,
Hmm.
but
No,
you would be more of
I
a
think it's a principled stance. And I agree with you in terms of like when if we're coming together, um, it's good that we can have like this amicable discussion and
mm-hmm,
we can come to different conclusions, but it stay amicable. I
mm-hmm,
guess um, in the context of a discussion like this, it is fairly easy for that to happen. I mean, not to, a lot of modern day left wing nut jobs that like just, constantly frothing at the mouth to sort of
yeah,
call you a Nazi, but like,
mm-hmm,
in general, it is easier in this kind of situation to come to an amicable agreement. I guess
mm-hmm,
the real sort of litmus test would be like in a society where it comes to implementing these laws, and you have this point of view, and I have a point of view. How do we get to uh, an agreement? Because ultimately, you can't just have like a disagreement. Somebody has to put the law
mm-hmm.
in somewhere. So, like, what do you think? Do you think like the current system in terms of like I don't know if this is going off on a bit of a tangent, but do you think because that's obviously the problem, isn't it? It's not
Yeah,
necessarily the fact that we can't have amicable disagreements. It's more the fact that like how do you put that into practice? Um, and like what does that mean? Because this is kind of like a microcosm of the wider issues in that sense.
yeah,
I actually think that like you wouldn't necessarily like this, and I wouldn't necessarily want to see it, but it's almost like, say, for instance, I'll give the UK as an example rather than the States because I don't want to see like the States get balkanized and split up into different countries and stuff. But it's almost like we need to have one country that has just conservative values forever, constantly.
mm-hmm,
One country that has, its liberal values, whatever it wants. And if you're born in the conservative traditionalist country and you have like these liberal values, you disagree with the sort of general consensus, go and live in the other country kind of thing. It's almost like we need to
mm-hmm.
like, we're not like a coherent tribe now that like all has the same
Yeah,
values. Like, and that isn't good for anyone. Like, I don't think that is good for anyone. We need to like, I kind of feel like we potentially do need to like diverge from one another. Like, that's pretty radical, and it's obviously not physically feasible. But
mm-hmm,
um, yeah, man, and obviously this kind of points to that. Like, because if I had to choose, like, and there was these in the States, it was split into two countries, and there was one country that had your absolutist gun laws, or another one that had you know, very strong gun laws. I would obviously choose. I would obviously have to choose the lesser of what I not the two evils, but
mm-hmm,
for lack of a better term, I would choose the one that maybe I didn't fully endorse, but I endorse more of your
mm-hmm.
point of view than the other one. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
and I
know,
think
man.
that's
I'm
the
just
reason
sort of
why, which right now in my like free time, I'm researching. I'm really going in depth on um, American history and mostly like on our founding fathers and the Federalist arguments. And so the
yeah.
Federalists were people who were for the Constitution, and to have a main federal government, and the Anti-Federalists wanted all the states to basically be their own country, and they
Hmm.
came into an agreement where we still have the federal government, and then each state has its own government. So I think what you're trying to say is what America is doing right now. Each state kind of has its own laws. Like I live in Oklahoma, we have very very lax gun control. Like it's to the point where you don't need a license or anything to carry a firearm openly or concealed. You don't have to go through any training or anything. You can just go to a gun store, buy a gun, walk out with it the same day.
Okay.
You still have to do a background check, but that takes about an hour to go through. But then you have California, who has very strict gun laws. But like I said, the red flag laws, and then they tried to ban assault weapons. I say with quotations, there's no such thing as an assault weapon. Any weapon can be used to assault someone. But they tried to ban them. It didn't really work. So they put these heavy restrictions on them where you can't have a magazine with more than 10 rounds. You have to have certain stocks on them. You can't put very many attachments on them, things like that. So,
Okay.
liberals can go live in California and have their strict gun laws, and then people like me can come to Texas or Oklahoma or Georgia or North Dakota, places like that where we don't restrict your gun laws. But then in Oklahoma, we have very strict drug laws, whereas California, Oregon, Washington, they don't have very strict gun or drug laws. So there's that up and down.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess what you're saying, yeah, it kind of does align with what uh, my sort of not really serious, but you know, sort of tongue-in-cheek suggestion would make. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think the problem is there's no mechanism to actually shift those people to California or shift the people that do agree with you to Oklahoma, and there's no uh, because I genuinely do think like there are people that they cannot live side by side, and there is no common ground. Like I used to think that common ground was a place that almost everybody could get to, but I see, I just don't see that now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I, and again, I don't want to knock, like, I don't want to just be like knocking the people on the left all of the time, but there is literally such a cultist like uh,
Mm-hmm.
orthodoxy there that like they will not be sort of convinced of
Yep.
anything. Like whereas on the right there is like a bit of variety of thought and like there is acceptance of different ideas and stuff and like
Yep.
it's kind of like that what's the quote like where it's like you can't tolerate the intolerant, which is almost like an oxymoron in the sense that like how can you not tolerate the intolerant? That means you're not being tolerant, but like
Mm-hmm.
it still has truth to it because it's like if somebody is so intolerant, um, that is going to erode everything that your sort of tolerant society has. So you can't tolerate intolerable people and like or intolerant people, sorry. And
Mm-hmm.
I see the left now representing that, and those people that say would be against the Second Amendment would would almost exclusively be in that category. Um, a lot of those people's views are like they they're not really, they don't have any really of the same values that you have.
Oh
Like
yeah.
there will be some, but you need more than some.
Mm-hmm.
You need like something to unify like a population. Uh, so like then the question becomes like how do you actually, because if you've got the system in the states where you've got like the federalist aspect and the non-federalist aspect is in you've got like the big national sort of government and you've got the individual states that have their own they've got some powers. So that is some solution to like be able to like chop and change between those sort of like almost like mini countries in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
like California's really liberal and Oklahoma is not. But like, how do you actually like quite literally physically achieve the sort of like um, what we're saying? Like, how do you get those liberal people to a liberal environment where they can't complain and they can implement the laws that might have completely destroy their society in whatever way they want, but they won't actually society. How do you achieve that like in
Yeah.
a fair way? Like that's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That's really difficult. And I know like that's obviously we've digressed from like the main point, but
Yeah.
like this is. But I just think it's an interesting and like uh, relevant sort of thing to be talking about because man, society is so polarized right now.
Oh
Obviously,
yeah.
gun laws just a one element of that, and they are like really sort of emblematic of like the wider issues. But like it's everything, man. It's absolutely everything. It's like and it's like sort of traditionalism versus liberalism. It's like um I don't know, like the sort of like trans rights movements or like people
Mm-hmm.
that are just more traditional, or like for like the nuclear family and stuff. Like it's like that. It's just two completely opposite sides, which they can't like that can't work together. People that believe in say like the traditional nuclear family
Mm-hmm.
versus people that believe in like trans women or men, in my opinion, competing in women's sports or going into women's bathrooms. Like these people can't live side by side. Their positions and their worldviews are so different.
Yeah.
They're so extremely different. Like you don't have a good society if you've got like people with such extremely different views clashing in every aspect of society. Like it just doesn't work, man. Like we're meant to be working in like a one large
Mm-hmm.
tribe for like the betterment and for the security, stability, and progression of like each other. Like that's why we have countries. It just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to just like lump everybody in together. Um, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm just making, yeah. Sorry, I'm just like sort of
Mm-hmm.
thinking out loud.
Yeah,
But
no problem, man. I'm listening and taking it all in. But so I believe in the individual's liberty, but I
agreed.
also believe the individual is dumb. And that goes for
Agreed.
myself. Sometimes I say things that are dumb and I
Yep.
do
Agreed.
things that
Agreed.
are dumb.
Hmm.
But so the thing with like the trans rights and people trying to say that they're women when they're actually men and go compete, yeah, that's just like a difficult thing because if they're so set that they have to be able to do that, it's like, well, we should be able to make their own league where trans men and trans women can compete against themselves, but that's not what they want.
No.
And so things like we were talking about the differences between California and Oklahoma, um, there is like in the Bill of Rights, amendments 1 through 9 are the basically the set rights that are, it's not power given to the government, it is telling the government these are the rights that you are not allowed to do anything about. But then the 10th Amendment says if anything's not listed in the Constitution, it is either given to the states to be deliberated on or given to the people. So
Right.
things like trans rights and like that should just be a personal issue. We shouldn't be going to the government to ask them to do something about it. It should just be done on a personal basis. So if the NBA wants to, or let's say the WNBA wants to let men pretend they're women and compete in there, then they should. And I mean, if their ratings go
Okay.
down, which they're obviously not very high, period, but people will either support it or they won't. And
Okay.
then you shouldn't be allowed to say anything about it. You should be able to say something about it, but you shouldn't, be able to do anything about it because it's a privately owned organization. But then when we
Okay.
tell the government that they have to go and tell them to do this or that, that's when it becomes a problem.
Mm.
Did I
Yeah.
kind of answer it?
Yeah. And obviously it is a complex discussion that.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you about that. They shouldn't be able to. The government shouldn't be sort of forced or obliged to sort of include that.
Mm-hmm.
It should be down to like the private citizen. I agree with that. Uh, but then like, how do I'm not sure. I just fundamentally disagree with like the whole premise of
Mm-hmm.
like the trans movement. Really,
Yeah, I do
it's not that I
too.
wouldn't be empathetic or uh, sort of like respectful but I don't think that's what it's about. I think
Mm-hmm.
genuinely, I think 99.9% of it is like an insidious narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a bigger play
Mm-hmm.
at hand, which is might sound conspiratorial, but I do genuinely think it's it's bigger than just it being a rights movement. I think it has its tentacles, or its links with, say, like that whole USAID thing, which is
Oh
all
yeah.
about, like, a subversive sort of unelected bureaucracy that is like essentially controlling almost every single sort of act on the stage, so to speak. And it's like, and I think trans rights is like that whole movement. Obviously, you're gonna get useful idiots. That not every single one of them
Yeah.
is a government stooge from the deep
Mm-hmm.
state. I'm not saying that. The majority aren't. Um, but I think that that potentially is how it was born.
Yeah.
And I think that it is for the. I think that the its reasonings are insidious, really insidious, verging on like malevolent, like, and so I just don't agree with it. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's evidence to suggest as much, actually. Um, I don't have the data to hand or the evidence to hand, but
Yeah.
I could probably go and bring receipts. Like if I ever came back to talk to you, or
Mm-hmm.
if somebody was listening and they wanted to go out and have a look at this kind of stuff, I'm sure there is evidence to suggest as much, that it's not all as it seems. So
Mm-hmm.
so when you were saying about the WNBA, for instance, having the sort of the rights to make whatever choice it wants, um, I am unsure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want a government to be able to, like, dictate to sort of the free market what it can and cannot do in a lot of ways. Some ways I think it needs regulating, obviously. Like, I think that some monopolies and stuff are just not good for people. So, you need some sort of something to be able to control that. But like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
totally in on like big government controlling every aspect of
Yeah.
everything. But at the
Well,
same
if
time, I'm like, this idea is it's insidious. How do we erase this and prevent it from happening again? Is it foreign governments that are like actually, like, potentially like the enemy of, say, the US, for instance? Like, is it them that are like pulling the strings? Is it like rogue actors
mm,
in the country that just want to see like the system be overthrown to implement a different system? Do you know what I mean? Like, or is
mm-hmm.
it just a bigger power play, like a longer term power play, where people that
Yeah.
have extreme wealth and extreme power want to just retain that, and they're doing all of this stuff to, it could be a bit of all of that it probably is, but um, we're kind of allowing that to perpetuate by not addressing it. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think principally, again, like, I agree with you. I think you can't really dictate to a private organization what they can and cannot do, in the majority of ways. But I wouldn't be an absolutist in that. Like, there are some things that you should be able to dictate to them.
Yeah. Um, so I'm going to ask you a funny question, and then I'm going to give my view on what you said. Do you have a tinfoil hat on right now?
I don't. I don't. I can go and get one.
Yeah, because I see
Go
what
for
you're
it.
saying, um, with the foreign actors and stuff. But
Hmm.
so to take it back to like the WNBA, so if they start allowing men to compete against women, what's eventually going to happen is it's just going to end up being all trans men because men are going to always be better than women. So the women who
Agreed.
don't agree with that, they're going to leave. And then they may go start their own organization where only women are allowed to compete against women.
Hmm.
So if we want to say things like the Olympics, yeah, someone needs to get in there and say, hey, that's not happening because this is supposed to be the best of the best men and the best of the best women competing against each other. We shouldn't have men switching over to compete against the women because that demoralizes it. But when
Hmm.
we're just talking about like the WNBA or women's soccer or things like that, like they can go do that, but then they're going to lose their viewership if people don't agree with it. And then eventually they're going to start losing their best people because they're just not going to be able to compete with that.
Yeah,
And then,
because that is how the free market works. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then to talk about the foreign actors and stuff, I mean, I do believe there is a little bit of that too because one of the easiest ways to control a person is through sexual desires. Um, and so when a person at a very young age is molested, they are much more likely to be brainwashed and have their mind be controlled. Um,
Hmm.
so pushing this ideology on children is where it becomes very, very weird. And that's where I will say, like, yes, we need to have the government step in and say, like, you're not doing this stuff to children. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I do think that there is a little bit of foreign adversaries that are trying to rot these countries from the inside out.
Yeah, I think potentially it's both. I think, um, or all of it. I don't just think it's the sort of enemies of like Western, uh, like liberal
Mm-hmm.
democracies that um like have a vested interest in it, like in seeing like the America crumble from within, because like obviously they have a vested interest in it. It's like if
Mm-hmm.
America just uh, slowly like loses its power economically or its social stability, then that is going to benefit China. That will benefit
Mm-hmm.
China. So they have a vested interest in that. We like that's obvious, but I do think that there like might be more complex or more even darker and more insidious agendas going on.
Yeah.
I actually do, and like um, I think that what you say makes sense, but this has become so widespread that they've literally ideologically and probably physically and administratively captured so many massive institutions and companies and businesses
Mm-hmm.
that they have the power now to actually do mass manipulation. Uh, and like I don't, that's not by sort of luck. I think that's by design. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I actually do think that that is by design, and I think like it's infected like mainstream media, which obviously most people get their information from. And that's one of
Yeah.
the reasons I was brainwashed against, say, gun control in the States was because, it, not that I should really have an opinion, but we people in this country do because we're exposed to US culture. But
Mm-hmm.
we had the BBC, for instance. When I was growing up, it was really highly regarded. It was in everybody's home. Like I'm 30, like in my late 30s now, like mid to late 30s. Um, and like so, like when I was say 12, like the internet really like only really just arrived. So like
Mm-hmm.
the TV and terrestrial TV and stuff was still a thing. Cable TV was still a thing. And the BBC was like the preeminent TV channel, BBC One and BBC Two, um, and like they produced everything from nature shows to kids shows. You know, throughout the day they have the news. People trusted that as a source of information. There might have been some people, but it was very limited. The dissenters. Most people,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it was like a national treasure, really. Um,
Yeah.
they are the ones that have like the monopoly on the information, and they were the ones not providing the context with regards to, say, the Second Amendment. They had an agenda, and they did it so subversively and so subtly that, like, unless you're properly clued in and you're getting information from different sources, it's really hard to break out of that and see a different perspective. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I really did it, speaking directly to Americans, which is
Yeah.
like come out of like modern technology, like I don't
Oh
know,
yeah.
Discord or like Xbox parties, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and X and Twitter, and like just seeing it and like growing up and experiencing it and asking questions. But like I was so brainwashed, and with going back to the trans discussion and the ideological capture and administrative capture of all of those institutions and departments and stuff. Obviously, the media is one of them, and that is like huge, man. That has huge influence on how your country will progress. Like, what will
Mm-hmm.
happen to it? Like, what will happen to all of those? And if they're in cahoots with big businesses um, that can use censorship, that can use cancel culture, that can, um, like they're all in it together. I think that is really dangerous, man. Like, so
Yeah.
dangerous. Like that is genuinely right now the US's biggest problem. 100%. It's the same with the UK. That whole like really insidious, like deep state of like, and all of this apparatus that they have, which involves all of those different departments and all of these different
Mm-hmm.
institutions that they're all captured. They're going
Oh
to
yeah.
fundamentally change society, not for good. And like, so when it comes back to the WNBA, I'm like, we kind of do need to do something about it. And uh, that might mean that that really absolutist view can't really be applied, because if you do apply it, it's like you're tolerating the intolerant again, and you're leaving yourself open to uh, sort of being hijacked, because that is kind of essentially what has happened on just a larger scale
Mm-hmm.
to your country, right? Like there's a reason why you're having all of these issues now, and it's not because the actual constitution was correct, was wrong. It's not because it is fundamentally, like morally, it feels right. It's right, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but in reality, people have taken advantage of some of those freedoms, and they've used it to undermine everything that's good about your country.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So
that's
how do
why
you prevent that?
yeah, I don't know, but
But how do
that's
you
a hard
prevent it
one
with
that
an
I haven't really
absolutist
thought
view?
about.
But
Um
okay, I guess my question then would be like, I'm not necessarily pinning it on your
mm-hmm.
absolute.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just saying like, perhaps being absolutist about it um, is ignoring those nuances that could lead to the sort of hijacking of everything that you hold dear,
Mm-hmm.
including the Constitution itself.
Yeah,
So
I
how do you
think
prevent that by having that absolutist view? I'm not too sure you can.
I think that's where
It's
the free
complicated.
market of ideas comes in the First Amendment, is where
Yeah,
we
definitely.
have this ability to talk about it. And as long as both sides can come in good faith, then the best weapon against bad ideas is good ideas. And the best
100%. Yeah.
defense against bad speech is good speech. So we have to allow everyone to speak. That's why I even see people saying, like, there are neo Nazis in America, and there are
Hmm.
pictures of them. You've probably seen videos of them walking the streets with Nazi flags. I defend their right to do that because, in my eyes, they're just being stupid.
Hmm.
And if we want to come sit down at a table and actually deliberate ideas, then the best idea will win. Um, no, obviously not always,
But
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 like,
and I do agree with that. But like, what if the you're not even getting exposed to other ideas?
mm-hmm,
Because that's essentially what's happening.
yeah,
It's like
that's why,
children going to school. You're saying like the government shouldn't be, say, teaching trans, like they shouldn't be in
mm-hmm,
public schools. They shouldn't have this trans sort of agenda or whatever. Okay, but like they're consuming it in every single other form that is probably just as influential, if not more influential, than school. Or it's still a significant part of like um, building up like their sort of persona. So um, that's free speech, but
mm-hmm. Yeah, because some people
it's
will just be useful idiots, and they won't want to dig into it any further. Just like um, there's this YouTube channel called Jubilee, and they host a lot of
yeah, I've seen
Democrats
it.
versus Republicans and
Uh-huh.
stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And a lot, like when they did I don't remember if it was specifically a trans rights debate, but
Hmm.
a lot of the people who were for the trans rights stuff, they would say gender affirming care works because there are studies that show within the first year, these people feel better about themselves and everything after having these surgeries.
Hmm.
But then they leave it there. They don't look
Yeah, it's not the
further.
full
2 to 3
context.
years down the road, almost all of them regret it. And a
That's confirmation
large
bias. It's like
majority, mm-hmm,
they want to believe it. They want to believe that it works.
mm-hmm,
So they're not going to seek out studies or information that flies in the face of their beliefs. And it's kind of like um, if they're not exposed to it in the media either because of political correctness, or exposed to it from
yeah,
organizations like the WNBA and stuff, then like how are they actually even going to get to the point where they can challenge that idea? I don't think there is a free market of ideas now.
Hmm.
Because I agree with you, like fundamentally, of ideas is like obviously people should come to the conclusion like that of the best things, but like when there's so many different factors, as you said, people are dumb. Like they are easily brainwashed. People are very
Hmm.
tribal. It's like an innate human sort of characteristic. Is so even in some cases like where they've clearly been proven wrong. The evidence is clear. You don't have to have eyes to
Yeah.
be able to see something. They still will reject it.
Hmm.
They still will reject that.
Yeah, there still are some
That's
people
like
that do that.
fully ideologically captured.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I
For
don't know.
me,
Like, I
like
just
it was abortion. When I first like
abortion's a
got
big one.
into
Yeah.
it, um, I just said I'm a man, so I'm not going to speak about it because I was told that abortions were only basically done to save the life of the mother and
Yep.
were just almost rarely done. And then
Yeah.
I actually found out that 97 to 99% of abortions are done for a
Just
pure,
convenience.
yeah, convenience or like
Yeah.
a form of birth
Inconvenience.
control.
Mhm.
Not
Yeah. Yeah.
not because the mother's life is at risk, or and then they want to say that like, oh, they wouldn't be able to support that kid, and they always come out at the right and say, oh, right wing is they're pro life, but then after that they don't do anything for them. It's like, well, a
Mhm.
majority of right wingers are um, Christian, and Christians nonstop raise money to support single mothers and first time
I
moms
know.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
I know.
you're
Yeah.
just lying.
That topic is another one which in the UK it was just sort of the norm to be pro-abortion
Mm-hmm.
and liberal because I think like women are just generally emotive and they tend to vote liberal anyway. They tend to have those liberal ideologies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, men like if you took out like media and stuff, like men would be obviously more conservative. They're more rational, logical. They're not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily as emotional. Leads to
Yeah.
different sort of ideologies. UK has been like totally like sort of emasculated. We don't have like a strong sort of right wing or like traditionalist sort of movement in the
Mm-hmm.
country that represents that. And abortion sort of the sort of general consensus of abortions in the UK, I would say, reflected that it was like very liberal, and I was again probably like, yeah, why, you know, uh, women should have like sort of my body, my choice kind of thing. Like I agree with that. I agree with it with the COVID thing. And I'm still kind of conflicted about it. But like the more I listen to arguments from pro-lifers,
Mm-hmm.
and because the more I'm actually leaning to that, and it took me until probably I was like 30 years old to really hear like be exposed,
Yeah.
be actually exposed to those arguments, because so like how could I like think outside of that bubble of
Yep.
liberalism when I wasn't exposed to another idea of some say like a Charlie Kirk or something coming up and saying, when does life start, blah 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 blah, and like going through it um I wasn't exposed to that, so how could I think like that? How could I even begin to sort of like question whether it was a good thing when I was never exposed to the other side? So now I've started getting exposed to it. I'm like, probably it is a tough one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, there's no question. There is no question that morally it's completely wrong.
Oh
Actually,
yeah.
completely wrong, and it is, um, again, like a symptom of like the rot that's taken hold in our culture. That like people think it's uh like a benevolent like thing, or like it's like a it's a good like nice thing to sort of support abortion. It's actually the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that is demonstrative like of the rot that has sort of taken hold in Western society for ages, and obviously has having a profound effect on like the countries that we live in. I'm probably anti-abortion now, actually,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
crazy, man. Crazy
Yeah.
to
I
think
used
that
to
like I would have
be
gone that far.
like like I said, like I used to just like not comment on it because like, oh, I'm a man, I can never get pregnant. That's not something I'd have to deal with. But then I rolled it back to like, oh, well, you should be able to do it up to 12 weeks. And then I've rolled it back completely to where I just look at it as murder
Yeah.
because, like I said, in the Declaration of Independence, it says all humans are endowed with a specific unalienable rights at their conception by their creator. These are rights that are unalienable. Everyone, at as soon as that egg is fertilized, that is a person to me. That is a human.
Mm.
We cannot argue that. It's biological fact. Um,
I agree. I do agree.
and
Yeah.
killing
There's
it is
no
killing
arguing
a
that.
human. So,
It is. It is. Yeah.
and I'm sorry that like a woman's body has to be used, but that's it's the biological fact of it.
It's nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm. This is the thing. I you cannot argue with that, yeah, unless you're totally irrational. Which
Mm-hmm.
again, when you're ideologically captured, you these things are challenging your sense of self. Like if you're in the pro sort of like abortion community, and like especially the people that say go on Jubilee and stuff, like if they that's like a big part of their self identity.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a challenge to everything. Like they're just this challenging everything about them as a person, not just their beliefs, but them. And they're obviously going to push back, and even when it's irrational,
Mm-hmm.
and they will reject what you just said there. But like
Oh yeah.
factually, scientifically, principally, like everything about that is your take is correct. And that's kind of what's won me over. So I guess in the free market of ideas, it's sort of like once I've been exposed to it, um, I'm I'm on board with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a really
Yeah, the only way they get
it's
away with
crazy.
it is by dehumanization. They call it a fetus and
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
baby or a
yeah.
human.
But that's so insidious.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of when I think if you put in your tinfoil hat on,
Mm-hmm.
that language is not used by chance. I really do think that
Mm-hmm.
that's by design.
Yeah,
There is a
it's evil.
reason. Yeah, yeah. So obviously you're a Christian. I'm not Christian, so I
Mm-hmm.
would ask you then, because this kind of it leads on when you mention evil. Um, I've become more spiritual as I've got older. I would have
Mm-hmm.
said like described myself as an atheist and stuff. Um, like, were you always Christian? Like, did like how what how, were you brought up in like a like quite faithful
Yeah,
household
I
or like
grew up in
what?
the Bible Belt of America, so obviously I was exposed to it very early on in life. But my
Okay,
parents directly, my dad, I have no idea. So I'll tell you, both my parents are meth addicts, and so
okay,
they really didn't have a role in my life. And at about 12 to 13 years old, DHS got involved, and I ended up, both my parents lost their rights to me and my brothers. I ended up being adopted. But so my parents directly, even my adopted parents, never had a religious role on me. And then but my grandma did. My
okay.
mom's mom. She took me to church and all that. And I always kind of wanted to go. I think it got instilled into me at a young enough age that I always wanted to be there. But then
Hmm.
after I got adopted, I ended up moving about 45 minutes away from my biological family. And so then I didn't have as much of a relationship with my grandma. And then she ended up dying in 2015. But
Sorry to hear that.
um, yeah, thank you. So about the time that I was 14 to 15, I really started walking away from the religion. And I wouldn't ever say I became an atheist, but I definitely kind of started to deny God. And then
Hmm.
once I got into my young adult life, I became an alcoholic. And it wasn't until about three years ago when I met my wife, she really brought me back into Christianity. And I've been going to church ever since.
Interesting. That's a quite a like I guess like powerful story really. Because it sounds like you've been through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And like you seem like a really swell guy. Like you've obviously got a good head on your shoulders, so
Yeah,
you
thank
seem
you.
like you've come out on the right side of it. But it is interesting because um, I don't know what prompted me to want to talk about it because you said
Yeah.
about like good and evil because I quite often think about that, and
Mm-hmm.
I would have been an atheist. Like I would have described myself as an atheist when I was younger, but I didn't really know. I thought
Yeah.
that just when I found out that it didn't really describe what I felt, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm an agnostic then because
Mm-hmm.
I'm just undecided. You know,
Yeah.
like I was christened, but again, like this country has been so um liberalized for such a long time that so like obviously gun rights aren't a thing. People are completely against guns. People
Mm-hmm.
are completely pro-abortion, and people, you know, there really isn't a very strong sort of Christian, like prevalent Christian or
Mm-hmm.
prominent Christian community in the country. Like people say they're Christians and people go to church, but even the people that go to church are not. They're not unashamed of it.
Oh
It's
yeah.
there's a very British kind of like approach to it where they're like a bit sort of like quiet and reserved and stuff, you know, like that typical British thing. And um, I think that sort of has an impact on, you know, like wider society and the acceptance of it or the rejection of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was probably one of the ones that fell by the wayside in terms of like I didn't get exposed to it really.
Yeah.
And like I'm still not. I don't go to church or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just like the older I've got, and the more sort of spiritual I've got through science actually.
Yeah.
Um,
Me
and
too.
like I'm a bit of a deep thinker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like the more I mean, my values align with Christianity
Yeah.
quite considerably, but I'm not a Christian because I am undecided. But I think there's a lot of science that would eventually lead to those spiritual questions, like whether you like it or not, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And that often makes me think about good and evil. You know, like is it a truly fundamental thing in the
Yeah.
universe? I mean, obviously, and I'm not going to challenge that. But I'm always like, is that a fundamental aspect of the universe, or is it just a matter of perspective and stuff? And
Mm-hmm.
but I'm starting to think like I actually do think there is such a thing um, as
Mm-hmm.
good and evil. I kind of do.
Yeah. Well, I think
Um,
once societies start diverging from God, and so I'm a Christian and I believe that my religion is correct, but I'm not going to go around spurting off at other people saying, like, if you're Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or whatever, that you're incorrect. But I do think that atheists are kind of incorrect because I think
yeah,
no matter what, if
I do
I'm wrong about
actually.
Christianity, I'm still 100% sure there's a God. Um,
Mm.
and that's why I believe in these evil and good. And so
Mm-hmm.
here's an excerpt from Ephesians 6:12. It says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places."
Mm.
And so I do believe that we're not just fighting against tyrannical rulers, we're fighting against people who have a deep-seated evil in them. And not to say that like
Mm-hmm.
these people are possessed by demons or something, but it is the walking away from God and denying him that leads to things like abortion. It leads to tyranny. And so a lot of people like
Yeah,
atheists will
agree.
tell you that America is not a Christian country. And then I will say, I agree with you. But almost every single one of our founding fathers was Christian.
Yeah,
And if they weren't Christian and there was no God, then all of our rights mean nothing. And
yeah,
when you say that there is no God, that means humans are the apex of morality. But when you believe in God, that means that there is a set morality of what is good and what is evil. If there's no God, then
yeah.
everything's up for interpretation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on the latter bit, I would say I'm unsure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but everything else I agree with. I think, you know, you look at the correlation of sort of human progression, like from like quality of life life expectancy, um, to sort of technological advancement, to um, like most of those things have been in an upward trajectory, uh, like throughout time,
Mm-hmm.
and like we're obviously but then they probably did plateau, and obviously I do genuinely. There is no denying that, like, if you look at Christian or historic Christian nations, um, they're the most prosperous ones. They're the best for everyone, like in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like relative to the rest of the world. And when you see a decline in that sort of or a liberalism of those countries and a rejection of Christianity, like there is a correlation between like lower or less human progression, less maybe not technological advancement. Maybe that was a bad one but
Mm-hmm.
definitely human progression and sort of like quality of life expectancy. That kind of stuff does seem to go down. Uh, and I think probably the data would back that up. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't think you can really deny that it's a really good vessel for human progression, because principally the principles and morals are in the right place. For me personally, I'm just out.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe in like a bigger collective consciousness.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of my belief. And like I sort of believe in like the multiverse and that kind of stuff. And there's evidence to suggest it, but I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it. I don't think that means like there's no God. Actually, I kind of do think that there is a God. I kind of think all of it is God.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Literally everything, every single thing, every
Mm-hmm.
bit of matter, from like the smallest, quantum level
Oh yeah.
to like the largest macro sort of the largest consciousness that you can imagine. I think all of it is God, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just whether or not to me, I'm not too sure if I can get on board with like it was specifically for us kind of God. So
Mm-hmm.
so like in the sense that you saying like you believe in the God and you at least know that that's going to be right.
Yeah.
So whereas atheists are completely wrong, I actually fundamentally, it's just the actual meaning of what that God is, and like why
Mm-hmm.
that God is and stuff is maybe up for debate. But that's definitely helped me as well.
Yeah.
With like regards to like my worldview and stuff. For sure, like thinking about it like that. But I don't know. I'm becoming more and more. Maybe it's just the sort of political and sort of social environment these days that like I'm becoming more and more
Mm-hmm.
convinced that like if I was to become like join some sort of religion, I would just go to the local church.
Yeah.
Like part of me, there feels like an inner sort of like innate desire to go there and do it,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
I would feel wrong, because like principally everything would be in line with my principles, but the final sort of conclusion about like, oh, it's just for mankind kind of thing, like um I mean, I'm not too sure if that interpretation's right, but I'm not too sure that I believe that, and to go there would be uh I'd be lying to myself and lying to the
Mm. Yeah.
sort of church itself. And um but yeah, I definitely respect Christians 100%, and
Yeah.
I
It's.
think that backbone of your country for sure. It was like the backbone of at least historically of the UK as well, which is why
Mm-hmm.
we live in a good, or what was a good society, and we have
Mm-hmm.
some stability and prosperity that other places don't have. I do truly believe that that's because of Christianity.
Yeah. I mean, Christians seem to be the only religion that you can make fun of. If you make fun of Jews, you get called an anti-Semite. If you make fun of
Mm-hmm.
Muslims, you get called an Islamophobe.
Mm-hmm.
And but Christians just take it, and because we don't really mind.
That's yeah. But part of me is like, again, that like sort of tolerating the intolerant though.
Mm-hmm.
Like at like what point do you allow it to become so uh like mocked and derided? And I'm not saying that people should be put in jail or whatever for mocking it, for like
Yeah.
literally mocking it. But um, I do think that like you can't be passive about it all of the
Mm-hmm.
time forever, because eventually it won't exist. You have to stand up and say stuff that, or do stuff
Yeah.
that people don't like to
Yeah.
protect it. Um,
That's
and I do kind of like uh, maybe like Christians themselves have been like propagandized so much by
mm-hmm.
media apparatus and all of that kind of stuff that even they themselves think like, I don't want to be a Christian nationalist, or I don't want to be this because they must be inherently bad because they. But like I kind of
Well,
respect the Christian nationalists and stuff in that regard, because I'm like, at least they have the guts
mm-hmm.
to really say what they believe in, which I probably align with more than most things. Um, but they're the people that will actually keep Christianity alive. Like if in these current circumstances where, like you said, it can be like derided completely and attacked from every single institution, every single angle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you know, look at the UK. Like ours is sort of been like diluted to the point where it's not even like out. The Church of England, for instance, supports like censorship. It supports
Mm-hmm.
trans like that whole trans movement. It supports like sort of mass like migration, like which like fundamentally is like probably undermining like our whole.
Yep.
It's not for human progression. The Church of England is not for human progression. In my, I'm not um religious person, but it's like it's going against God. It's going against everything that it purportedly stands for.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably because it was diluted, because it allowed itself to be sort of derided. It wasn't strong enough to sort of push back against that sort of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I
The
respect
thing,
Christian
the thing
nationalists.
with Christians is, so Jesus died for all of our sins, and that being a Christian is admitting that you yourself are a sinner, but you
Hmm.
want to be better. And so we try every day to follow the words of Jesus, but we all fall short of the grace of God. But in
Hmm.
the end, Jesus saved us. So when someone comes at us and attacks us, we just know you're no different than me. You know, you're a sinner, I'm a sinner. The only thing is I try to be the best that I can. And I still have shortcomings, but I've been washed by the blood and I've been saved. So
Hmm.
I know that as long as I pick up my cross and I bear it, then at the end, I hope to go to heaven, but I don't expect to go to heaven because I know of all the things that I've done, and so it's easy. Um, so I'll read Matthew 7, which is what a lot of people who are against Christianity try to use against Christians for a lot of things, but they really take literally the first two words of the chapter, um,
Right.
which says "judge not." But if you read the rest of it, it says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. With the measure you use it will be measured to you," which basically means don't be a hypocrite. And then
Yeah.
it goes on
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log
Mm.
out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye."
Okay. Interesting. So that last bit's quite interesting. So it's saying like, you know, I guess it's sort of challenging you
Mm-hmm.
to change yourself before you try to change the
Exactly.
other person.
If I'm
Okay.
a drug addict and then I want to sit here and spurt to my brother about his alcoholism, well, why don't I first clean up my act
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go tell him?
Mm. That is a and
So,
like sort of logically,
just even logically, not even principally, but just logically, that actually makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there's nothing false about that whatsoever. Like that is completely, you know, completely true. It makes complete sense. That saddens me actually, because I like to think of myself as like a really empathetic, considerate, compassionate person.
Mm-hmm.
But even I like, and honestly, like I really do really try my best to be fair, considerate, kind, and stuff. There are some things, especially in recent times, where like I feel like even I've been like corrupted. And when I say even I, like I'm emphasizing,
Yeah.
like I'm like, you know, I'm not saying like I'm second coming of Jesus or anything like that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that. I'm just saying like I always considered myself to be, and I know like in my heart that I was like that. Like really, I was always really kind. I never. I don't know where it came from, but like I was like that. I feel like in the last, like since all of this sort of like political, maybe I've got more cynical as I've got older, but also just like just everything that I held dear, so I felt like it was being under attack. Even my own character, my own sort of identity was under attack. Let alone like people that I love and stuff, you know, and their identity and their sort of. It feels like that's all corrupted me to the point where maybe I'm not as compassionate and stuff now.
Yeah.
And like that sort of ties in with what you're saying about. Like, I don't know. I was thinking of one particular specific sort of situation
Mm-hmm.
where like perhaps I'm being a bit of a hypocrite.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should mention it, so I won't mention it.
Yeah, we can
yeah,
talk about it in
sort of like
private later if you want to.
yeah, it's just an opinion on like world events
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. And maybe I'm being a hypocrite. Maybe I'm not being fair. But I
Mm-hmm.
find it really and you know, like I guess like you said, you know, if there is a God, which you believe, and I'm unsure. Well, no, I believe there's a God, but like whether it's the sort of Christian version of a God,
Yeah.
I'm unsure. I do believe that it would be benevolent for sure. I'm just not sure it's exactly how you would say. My personal opinion, but I can, you know, I'm not like that's not a cemented sort of position.
Mm-hmm.
But if in your words that you know you do fall short of them, then that would be me falling short by being corrupted. And I would have always been falling short, but like even more so. And I don't want to be that. Like, you know, I want to be like empathetic. I want to be kind, compassionate, considerate, and caring for everyone.
Yeah.
It is hard though. It is bloody
Mm-hmm.
hard.
There's a difference
You know?
though between being empathetic and loving someone, but then not calling out their wrongdoings. So
True. Yeah.
if you love someone, you're not going to
You
let them continue to be a drug addict and ruin their
tell the
lives.
truth. Yeah.
You're going to tell them the truth about this, but you'll still love them. You know, you don't need to come at it in anger. Even if it's affected you specifically, like say they've borrowed thousands of dollars from you and said they're going to pay it back, but they've only ever used it on drugs. You have to kind of throw that to the wayside and say, hey, look, I love you and I want you to be better. But you have to quit doing these drugs. And if you want to go do them, then fine. But you have to understand that it's not good for you. And if they don't want to admit that it's not good for you, good for them, then they're lying to themselves.
Yeah. What about? I'm trying to wondering whether I should sort of bring up the exact issue because it's very contentious, very prickly subject. But like, what about if it's resulting in the loss of people's lives? Like, I guess okay. I'm just gonna say that, for instance, this whole like Israel, Gaza issue. I am pretty anti-Islam.
Yeah.
I think it's completely anti-human. I don't think it's positive for any like sort of metric of human progression in any way. I don't see it. Like I see the correlation between death and destruction.
Yeah.
And like poverty and just every sort of bad thing possible that I could associate with it. Really, to be quite honest, and I'm not judging individuals, but I'm judging just the ideology itself. Um, so like, but then when you see like the majority of people being captured by like the really extreme like part of that ideology, which I would say a mass like proportion, like mass portion of like Islam is actually very extreme. I don't think it's a fringe thing. I think extreme views are quite prominent just in the normal people. Like when I see, say, like the Israel Palestine thing, for instance, what I mean, I sort of have looked into a bit of the whole history. It's obviously very complex, and it is like an eye for an eye for an eye, just over and over and over, you know. But say, for instance, that October 7th thing, like I've seen some. I try to steer away from it because I don't want to see gory stuff. But like I've been accidentally exposed to a few just heartbreaking, like horrendous things from like that like festival. I'm like,
I saw them too. It was
that is
awful.
disgusting in every way. It, like literally makes my heart sink when I see those people, and I'm like, that could be my girlfriend, like, or my niece, or people you love, like in sheer terror, just being treated like complete objects and just killed for nothing. And they've got their whole future, and they're just there, just terrified. And it really does, like, they're terrified when they die. Like, it makes me absolutely sickened, and that's pure evil that does that.
Yeah.
The people that have been ideologically captured that support that, like, because I do support what Israel is doing, I guess, and that's where I'm questioning: am I being a hypocrite there? Because there probably are innocent people being caught up in that.
It's
and
okay to
I'm,
support
like, generalizing
them.
a whole population of, say, is like Muslims in Gaza, because I associate the whole ideology with death and destruction and despair. So like I'm condemning everyone because of that sort of outlook that I have on that ideology, which I think is fairly accurate. But obviously there are, it's not every single person believes in all of that stuff in, say, Gaza. But even if it was like 95% of them did, there's still 5% of people that just are like regular people that are caught up in it. But then like part of me is like, I guess it's like a vengeance streak, which is obviously evil. And like, and like part of me is like, part of me is like, Israel deserves the vengeance. Like what they did to them was despicable, absolutely pure evil. So like, what choice do they have? Is that bad? Am I corrupted? Like to the point of like no return? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I understand what you're saying.
Like that's really what I feel. Like I really feel strongly about. Like it's like after I saw those things that happened on October 7th, it's genuinely, those people deserve to be in hell. Like the ones that did that and the ones that support it. I almost feel like, I mean, you won't agree, but like they're almost irredeemable. They are the most evil of. You cannot sort of condone that. But then on the flip side, am I doing the same with Israel's response? That's, I guess, my question. Am I being that hypocrite? Am I doing what you just said?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And there's a way of supporting them, but we have to remember, like, justice. So justice is not like if someone abducts a young boy, traps them in their basement for 5 years, and rapes them and tortures them. Justice is not catching that guy, putting him on trial, proving that he did it, and then saying, oh, for 5 years, I need to rape you and torture you. It's no, we just kill them. So
is that justice?
Yeah. That is justice. When you take him and you execute him for his crimes, because that is 100% in my views.
Okay, yeah, but is that does that align with Christianity? Does that align with?
Yeah, in the Bible it says if you offend, I can't remember the exact verse, but it basically goes if
you don't have to recite exactly. Yeah, that's fine.
If you offend against the little ones, then you rather should have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea. And that basically it's basically saying if you rape children, then you should die. And there is a lot in God, he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of the things that they were doing. And so it is a Christian thing to do, but you can support Israel, but still call them out when they do things that are the same thing that the Muslims are doing. They shouldn't go invade Gaza and start raping all their women and torturing them, just like Gaza did.
Okay. So
they should go in there and
of course
eliminate Hamas and the people that did that, capture them, get their hostages back, and that's it.
I guess like in a realistic sort, because I agree with that. Like obviously I wouldn't condone, because again, like if that was my partner that lives in Gaza and I lived there just because of where I was born, and she got raped by somebody, like it would destroy me. It would destroy. It would turn me evil. It would destroy me. So I completely agree with that. But I guess in the modern sort of theatre of war, so to speak, it's not as easy to just go in and pick off every single evil person that you can find that supported it or that condoned it or that actually took part in it. So if there are innocent people that get caught up in it, inevitably there would be.
Yeah.
But I think that their response is far more just and justified than the initial act that caused that response. So is that fair to still support that? Like,
yeah, I mean,
do you see what I'm saying? Like, because so for instance, if there's like a Hamas group in a building, and they'll drop leaflets or they'll give them a warning to get out.
Yeah.
But there's still some casualties that are on the ground, and they got killed by the collapsing building because they killed out, say, like 30 Hamas guys in this building. Is that acceptable?
I really don't think it is, because bombs are indiscriminatory, but a gun can be discriminatory.
But that how do you realistically do it, like feasibly, like not like economically, like everything about it, economically, physically, like how do you actually go about getting those individuals? Because if they go in there just like on foot or vehicles, like we all know like what will happen. Like it's not as clean cut as just going into a building and sort of like arresting somebody with like a SWAT team or shooting somebody with a SWAT team in the States or whatever. It's not like that. It's like going into a mass riot and trying to pick one person out on the ground, but instead of them pushing you around, the potentially the high likelihood of you getting killed is through the roof. So
and the thing with the Muslims is they always use civilians and stuff. Like even Osama bin Laden, when SEAL Team 6 went and raided his compound, he hid behind his own wives because he's a coward.
Don't value.
Yeah, they don't value life.
They're like they don't value life, and they're like so selfish and like I guess narcissistic doesn't even really describe what they are, but it's like all about them.
Yeah,
it's about their route to heaven, and no, they don't care about who they hurt or what gets just destroyed along the way. It's just about them. And like to me, that is not altruistic at all. Like, you should care about other people. You should want other people to have safety and security, and like, give them love and like affection. Like, if you don't do that, you're obviously not a compassionate human, and you only care about yourself. And you're not deserving of like, sort of love and compassion yourself. So like, I don't know, man. It's really complicated. I guess my point.
Yeah.
Because I do tend to drag these things out, and I do apologize. I guess my point was, am I being a hypocrite? And you kind of answered it in saying like yes and no.
Yeah. So, as long as you are still willing to call out their wrongdoings, because Hamas bombs hospitals all the time. And then the other day, Israel bombed a hospital. And so there's this quote, and I can't remember who said it, but you have to remember when you're fighting monsters to not let yourself become a monster. And so like one of the reasons why the Afghanistan and a majority of America's involvement in the Middle East never really worked was because, say, you have a group of 10 guys, five of them are 100% like death to America at any cost. I'm going to kill any American. Then three of them are on the fence, and two of them are just there because, that's like the group they ran with. Then you go out and you kill their friends. Now they become more radicalized because all they see is, oh, they were right. Americans do want to kill us too.
Mm.
And so it does become very complicated. And that's why I don't have the right answer too,
Yeah. Yeah, no, because it continues the cycle, and it's
like
you do feel like it's hard to deny that feeling of like vengeance, which is terrible. But like it is really hard to control that emotion because you're like like those feelings are so visceral. Like you just imagine your most cherished loved person being in that sort of October 7th thing or whatever.
Oh yeah, I'd
have
want
to be extremely strong character to deny those emotions. Like you really would. Like, does that make you evil? Does that make you inherently terrible? Because we know like the answer really is it doesn't make you inherently evil, but that action would, whatever you would want to do, it kind of is evil. It kind of is a bad thing because it's not for human progression. It's not for good, like altruistic sort of reasons. I don't know. I think I just find all of that stuff really like hard to juggle.
Yeah, it's super complicated, and especially like these wars have basically been going on for well over 1,000 years. And the only real way that you could actually say to stop it is to end the Muslim ideology completely. But like I said, if you go out and you kill thousands of them, they all have family members. They have brothers and sisters. They have moms and dads. They have cousins. And when they just see you go kill their mom and dad, that they're not going to think you're right.
Yeah,
so
sure,
it is very hard, and they're obviously not open to diplomacy. So
it's a really difficult one.
Yeah, and you can't just sit around and wait for more October 7th to happen.
No. So what do you do? It's so tough. Yeah, I'm not sure. I truly believe that is going to be, because I mean, again, I'm not too sure of what your, because lots of people that are religious have like different sort of takes on like the future of humanity, or like what the objective is and stuff. But like I do truly think that like we have the potential. I believe in like the the universe is absolutely massive. There's more to it than just us. I do believe that. I don't know if you do, but I would say I do believe that. I think it's just the science is just undeniable at that point, and I do trust the science to that degree. And I think like if we have the potential to reach the stars and to do incredible things, I really do. But the main thing that I think would prevent that genuinely is I kind of feel like Islam is like potentially the most toxic, dangerous, sort of biggest hurdle to humanity. I actually can't think of something else that is more sort of an antithesis to sort of human progression than that. It's really tough. Like, all I see is death and destruction. Like terrorist attacks all of the time. Some of the worst, most heinous crimes that you can think like imaginable. Just the mass oppression of huge sections of society, women and like people that don't necessarily agree, like believe in what they believe, even their own sort of people that aren't radical potentially would be like oppressed and stuff, and like they disown family members for leaving. It's very cultish, like so people don't leave it. Just everything about it, I don't see like that they treat
there's no examples really where they treat like the environment well, their environment well. There's no like sort of real place where there's like super like sort of high technological advancement, which leads to sort of maybe the quality of life, better quality of life for humans. I don't see any of that. There's no like real evidence for any of that.
Yeah.
You might get like the odd anomaly here and there, but you probably argue that it isn't directly because of Islam. It's probably Western influence or Christian influences allowed them to have that. Say like Dubai, for instance, you know, like people be like, well, look at that society, like they've got like skyscrapers and this, that, and the other, and you're like, well, that's not a function of Islam. That's because they've westernized and they've you know, they've had some sort of like free market sort of stuff going on.
Even Iran needed like Russia and China to get to the point where they had the ability to make nuclear bombs.
Yeah, obviously, like just take all of Western society out of it. Would they even have discovered like that like idea? Probably not. Like, it's not like science is like a huge part of their sort of culture. It flies in the face of most of the stuff that they believe in, and that's, I don't think that with Christianity actually. Like, I think the evidence is there for people to see. You know, you just need the eye test to be able to see like which civilizations progressed scientifically and sort of saw prosperity amongst humans rise. It was Christian nations. It wasn't Islam. It wasn't Islamic nations. There's like maybe some fallacies about like their science and stuff like in at certain points in time. And even if some of that were true, which probably some of it is true, but some of it is not, with regards to their like scientific history and stuff, it obviously plateaued because we were the ones who created all of these successful societies. And if you look around the globe, where are their successful societies? Where are their ones where, like, you know, people have rights, people have dignity, people have prosperity and stuff? That's very few of them. Very few of them. So I kind of think it's just pattern recognition at this point for me.
Yeah.
You know, like you just see it en masse and you sort of come to a conclusion. You're like, that can't be good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of feel like that is, I guess the like the sort of anti-human sort of ideology that is really dangerous. So I just put that out there for you to judge, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm kind of with you. Like, Israel has a right to defend themselves, and they obviously, it's easy for Americans to get into this, and because in America we're very safe from, we haven't really been invaded much. Like, we've 9/11 happened, Pearl Harbor happened, but China hasn't like stormed the beaches of California.
No. Your country is too perfect in that sense. Like, it's quite isolated. You've got two huge oceans.
Yeah.
Like on either side, you know.
And then we have like mountain ranges on each side.
Exactly, and you've got two borders, like with, you know, Mexico and Canada. Really. I mean, you might have or whatever, but in reality, like, you know, you don't have the same like cultural and social friction that like these other countries have. So and to some extent, the UK is similar. Obviously, not the same because we don't have this big seas and oceans between like our competitors or whatever. But you know, we are still an island nation. Are still kind of like shielded from a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, so it's easy for us to get into the conversation and try to give a nuanced perspective on it, but at the end of the day, if you were Israel, you're surrounded by Muslim nations. So they have to do something to ward off these attacks and everything, and it's just it's very hard. And I mean, I wouldn't want to be the guy making those calls and stuff. So
no, it's a poison chalice in that sense, isn't it? Like, it really is. Like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, kind of thing. You are. And it's just an awful situation. But yeah, I didn't want to get like too caught up on that one particular one because it's kind of boring as well. Like,
Oh yeah.
For me, like, it's already settled. Like, that's one thing that, like, I'm pretty settled on, in terms of, like, I don't know if I'd change my position very easily, because I'm so uh, Islam in general. I think, which sounds bad, but I'm just being honest. But yeah, so I didn't want to get caught up on it too much. But I think, like, in terms of, like, the hypocrisy bit that we talked about, was quite insightful what you said.
Yeah.
I definitely will take that on board. Like I said, with regards to religion, I don't know if I'll ever sort of pursue it anymore. I feel like part of me wants to push back against the, like, cultural and, like, sort of traditional, like, the erosion of tradition.
Yeah.
By joining something which I associate with tradition, and, like, a lot of it does align with my principles. I just feel like I think I would feel like a bit of a fraud if I went there and didn't fully endorse everything. So, which is kind of why I haven't done it, because we do have a local church. It's beautiful as well. But you know, maybe the time's not right at the moment.
Yeah.
But maybe at some point. But
I'm gonna pause for a minute because I have to go to the bathroom, and we'll pick this back up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'll go do the same. Actually, is that okay? Yeah. So I was obviously, during that, I was about to go and just grab some food. I've got some nice treats in the house, but I'm trying to stay good at the moment, because I like, started exercising again recently, and I haven't done it for, like, I don't know, like 3-4 years since COVID.
Yeah.
So it's, like, half tempted to grab this, like, nice big chocolate cookie.
Oh yeah.
That I had, but it's like, oh, maybe I should save it. Do another hour's workout. But yeah, like, what are your thoughts on COVID and stuff? Did you
Oh yeah.
sort of like, were you involved, like, or, like, not involved? Were you sort of deep in it, in terms of, like, politically and sort of, like, morally and stuff? What are your thoughts on that? It'd be interesting to see what your experience was like.
I think it's gonna probably be a common thing with my new guests, is to talk about COVID, because it was something that we all experienced pretty much across the world, across the countries that we live in. We all had our own very unique view on it. But I lived in a red state, so by 2021, we pretty much had already lifted our restrictions, and our governor had already spoken out that he was never going to have a vaccine mandate. And so for me, I used to be in the medical community. I wanted to become a nurse, but then I ended up giving that up because I didn't like college. And so I looked at it from a medical perspective, and I knew from my own knowledge that masks were more or less pointless. So I never really wore a mask, except for times when, like, went to see elderly family members and stuff in the hospitals or stuff like that. You obviously, like, you want to see them, so you have to kind of get in, like, okay, I'll wear this mask for 10 minutes. But yeah, I was very outspoken with, like, no vaccine mandates, because, like, I believe in individual's liberty and individual's choice. And the same thing with the mask. Like, if you want to wear it because it makes you feel better, then fine, but don't make me wear it.
I agree.
And I got lucky with my job that we're unionized, and our union actually was in favor of not making us wear masks. So it was pretty nice, even though the company pushed for it so hard. They never.
They're just in on it. Like, that's kind of what it feels like. Those, like, the big sort of faceless corporations, and you know, their stooges, so to speak, are just all in on this big conspiracy. But, like, it should have always been informed consent. You know, you get given the information, true information, not like hodgepodge of sort of
Yeah.
like propaganda and some truth and then some lies, like the truth. And then you make your own decision on it. Like that's kind of how I thought it was. It was weird. Did you have a vaccine or did you have an?
I never
you
got the
didn't.
COVID vaccine.
See,
OSHA was
yeah.
about, or not OSHA, the government, Biden at the time, was about to mandate that any employer that employed more than 100 people every employee would have to get the vaccine. Then OSHA came
That's
out
wild.
and said, no, you can't do
What's
that.
OSHA?
Do what?
What is OSHA? Sorry.
Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's they make all the rules over the employers and say things like you have to provide them safety equipment. You can't let children work in factories, and
well, thank God they actually intervened because
I thought they were
those kind
captured.
of mandates are, well, maybe they are, but maybe they've still got some sort of principled members, or some sort of their principles are still, because some of the stuff, man, is just like goes completely against, like completely sort of flies in the face of like their sort of medical oath, stuff like that, and it's just disgusting. It genuinely was. That was the biggest red pilling moment, I think, of my entire life.
Yeah, I think it was for a lot of people.
Be in it and really realize like how like the whole mass manipulation works, how the whole system works together, in sort of lockstep with one another to create, to manipulate public opinion. It was a huge, like unprecedented eye opener. And like an idiot, I was always against the vaccine, because I was like, well, it just made no logical sense to me. I like, in terms of I understand the idea of vaccines, but I was completely averse to it to begin with, just because of how vociferously they were like pushing it and stuff. I was like, there's something really quite worrying, like disconcerting about this, like how they were pushing it and stuff. And obviously I saw the like mandates and stuff in the States. I was completely against it, and I was like, well, if you're healthy, you should be able to fight it off. It's just like, it's like the natural human thing. I'm not saying like if it had a huge death rate, I'd potentially be looking at it differently. But at the time, it was quite clear that it was just vulnerable people that were dying, and even those statistics were inflated like by spurious like sort of things like like people bloody falling off of a building or something, and like if they had COVID, they'd be marked up as that kind of like absurdity to it, that you're just like, there is something very like worrying about this push to get the vaccine. So I was completely against it, and then I kind of got coerced by my mum, and I really regret it. It's the biggest regret of my life. I had one completely ruined my life, like I was working in finance at the time. I didn't love the job, and I was quite stressed, and I was like working out like 5-6 days a week. Me and my girlfriend had just bought a house, like our first house, and like that's probably the most active I've ever been. Like I was in the best position I'd ever been, like employment wise. Physically, I probably wasn't in the best shape I'd ever been, but I was in good shape. And I had that vaccine, and like I've literally never been the same since. I've had like 3 or 4 years off of working out, of like exercising. Like I've developed like palpitations and chest pains. I've had like endless like bad like other weird symptoms like just throughout that whole time. I lost my job, and like I've actually been unemployed for quite a while now. It just changed me just fundamentally as a person. It has like had such a big effect, and like I put it all down really to the vaccine and like on effects. Obviously, it's probably more nuanced than that, like in terms of like other factors. But that was the catalyst for sure. And getting all of the physical symptoms and stuff that went along with it. Really, really screwed me. Really, really screwed me, and I've never been the same since.
Yeah, a majority of my family got the vaccine, and they're all fine as far as I
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
But so, like, how much weight did you gain? You mind
Um,
saying?
what? Yeah. So I'm about 6 foot, 6'1",
Mm-hmm.
and like I was always slender.
Yeah.
Like mainly like I didn't have like huge amounts of like muscle and stuff on my legs for some reason. Like
Yeah.
always struggled to like build up my legs, but like
Mm-hmm.
wasn't I was still in good shape. So like I'd usually fluctuate between sort of like 12 and 13 stone, and I probably should like at that height maybe be like 13, 14 stone. Um, so in pounds that is, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
Stone
I
is
was
like the
about to
most
look it up.
archaic. It's the most archaic measurement sort of
I used to know the
like
conversion, but I can't remember it now.
so it's I think it's 14 pounds per stone. So it's which is like 7 kilograms,
Mm-hmm.
or 6.5 kilograms or something. So uh, let's say I used to like be in the range of like 168 to 182 pounds.
Yeah.
Um, and I have gone up to like uh, probably around 200 pounds, 205 pounds,
Okay.
which doesn't sound like a massive amount, but for
Oh yeah.
obviously it's quite individual, isn't it? It's quite like it it depends on the individual, so it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
convey. But it's like where the body weight has gone, and like how unfit I'd got, and how just bad my diet had got. But
Mm-hmm.
that is all like a consequence of something before it, and eventually that just leads back to the COVID vaccination, because after the COVID vaccination, it wasn't instant. Like, or when I had the COVID vaccine, I did feel quite bad on the day, but obviously once I'd got past that, it wasn't instant. But within maybe 2 or 3 months, I got awful back pain, upper left
Mm.
back pain, and just all around like my collarbone and my shoulder, and just on the left side, and in my chest as well
Yeah.
on that side, and that's obviously really concerning. And that just didn't go for ages, literally years and years. I just had so many tests and went to so many different things and just couldn't get rid of it. Um, and some days it was extremely bad, extremely bad. And that's sort of how I lost my job. Actually, it was because I made quite a big financial error, but it was because I was going into work because I couldn't convey it to them. I mean, I couldn't get anywhere with like the health services. Couldn't get a diagnosis. Couldn't make
Mm.
any progress whatsoever. So I was going into work and I was in like absolute agony pretty much all of the
Yeah.
time. And like I just couldn't concentrate, and like my job was like required like a high level of concentration, like because I was like dealing with like we were getting like loans and stuff out, and like it was like I was in like a treasury department, so like one tiny digit wrong in like say like a loan application,
Mm-hmm.
some sort of documentation regarding like a big loan, and because the loans were so big and we were getting them all of the time, it would be worth like hundreds of thousands of pounds, or up like my mistake was probably worth over $1 million,
Okay.
definitely. And like so like I took so at that point it got like obviously it was like perpetuating stress, which is not
Mm-hmm.
helping
Yep.
like all of this. And then I was like, I'll take some time off work because this is just gonna just make things worse. So then I ended up taking I was about 6 months in to being off, and like it hadn't improved. Like I was in a terrible state, and they just basically sort of terminated my contract. I say a mutual termination because I agreed to it, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think technically it would be a mutual termination. Um, and then like I haven't been employed since, which is wild. And I'm not
Yeah.
like sort of like trying to like hang on to like all of these sort of this social safety net and stuff, but just up until this point, like I would have just lost a job within like a week if I would have carried on. Like it was just because it
Mm-hmm.
was so volatile in every way, in every sense. It wasn't just like physical; it was mental. Like it was genuine mental health, and like I did develop like severe anxiety, where because I know that's a bit of a buzzword these days. Like it's a bit of a shame because how I'd explain it is people that I feel like the word has been diluted, similar to like how the flu and
Yeah.
the common cold has sort of like, some people interchange those terms, and they'll say they've got the flu when they've actually got a common cold. And like, if you've had the flu, you'll know that the flu is significantly worse than having a common cold, like significantly worse. And I think the same can be said with like this sort of whole anxiety thing.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I genuinely get like really, really bad tangible physical effects of it. Like, and it can be so sudden and like so out of the blue. Like, I could just be sat here right now and just get one tiny sensation,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be like almost bedridden for like a week. Like, I got
Mm.
really like dangerously like shaky on my feet and stuff. Like, I feel like my heart's racing. And I mean, like, as in like the heart is racing. It's like probably like over 100 beats per minute all of the time when I'm having it, and that could go on for like days and days and days. And I'm like, it's just like I've got like a whole like sensation in my core of my body, like from my chest and downwards, and it's just hard. It's so hard to describe, but it is life altering, like completely life altering. So
Yeah.
I've developed that, like obviously all of the other stuff. So yeah, just been like a road to recovery basically. Since then, and like really in the last like month or two, things have started changing, which is I've actually started like exercising again, like
Mm-hmm.
basic stuff, but which is why I didn't have that chocolate cookie I was talking about
Oh
earlier.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's just a like, yeah, whirlwind of kind of like shitty stuff that was happening, and I kind of all associate it with uh, that COVID jab, to be honest. And it's taken me this long to get to the point where like I'm maybe getting back to normal. But it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just me that it happened. I've had like, obviously it's just anecdotal stuff, but like friends like that were like super fit and super healthy. This changed them completely as well. So I've seen like obviously the data, I've seen like the mass manipulation, and I've also seen anecdotal and examples to show like
Mm-hmm.
it was terrible, man. It was absolutely terrible.
That's interesting. Yeah, that definitely sounds like heart problems, but so like do they do cardiograms and
Yeah,
stuff like that? And
yeah,
they said like
yeah, yeah,
nothing.
yeah. So I've actually got a cardiology appointment soon. Thankfully, like, well, I say thankfully, we've got like free healthcare. Did I break
Mm-hmm.
up then? Hopefully I didn't break up. But yeah, thankfully we've got free healthcare. That's another topic that we could go into, but it has its benefits and it has its
Yeah.
drawbacks, just like your system. To be honest, it's not
Mm-hmm.
perfect like the people over here would have you make it out to be, because it's definitely not. But I have had a lot of tests, and I've got a cardiology appointment soon. But I've had an echocardiogram, which is
Mm-hmm.
like an ultrasound for your
Yeah,
heart.
I'm pretty familiar with those.
Yeah, I've had like numerous ECGs, which are
Mm-hmm.
obviously snapshots of your electrical activity, which I was always questioning that aspect of it, because I was like, well, what if it's not happening at this current time? You're not going to see anything, are you? Because it was very volatile, random.
Mm-hmm.
I had an ECG stress test.
Yeah.
I had chest X-rays, probably 2 chest X-rays. I saw a cardiologist just to discuss it, and I also paid for. It's called a Zio patch, so Z or ZIO, and it's like, it's not a Holter monitor, and I think a Holter monitor is basically like an ECG
Mm-hmm.
that you wear for
Yeah.
like 2-3 days. But this Zio patch, I think, is similar. Like, you just stick it to your chest, and you wear it for like 2 weeks, and you can't shower and stuff, or you can't get it wet.
Yeah.
And so I paid for that one though. I didn't. That wasn't through our National Health Service. That was I paid money for that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it all came back normal. Which, when you go through something like this for so long, it was
Mm-hmm.
other stuff, like I was getting stomach pains. It was always predominantly on the left side.
Yeah.
I definitely developed health anxiety. I didn't trust it, because it was like they were trying to dismiss it as initially as anxiety, and this was when I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't even really developed anxiety. I was stressed, but I was really getting tangible physical symptoms. I knew what was happening to me. Like I was
Yeah.
in, like I knew these pains, and like I knew that they were worrying, especially where they were and like sort of the when they'd happen. And I did my sort of research on it and stuff, and I knew they were worrying. But when you get to the bottom, when you don't get to the bottom of it, you really do. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely developed health anxiety, so I didn't, and even now I don't really trust all of those results. Um,
Yeah.
and that is a problem, because then you do end up getting into a bit of a vicious cycle where you cannot stop yourself. So you'll end up
Mm-hmm.
just, you'll get one test and it'll give you some sort of solace for like maybe a week or two. And then once that runs out, you'll be like, right, I need something else. I need another test. And that isn't economically viable, especially when you'd lost your job like me. So
Mm-hmm.
it's tough. Yeah, really tough. So it's not
Yeah.
over, but yeah, man, I would just, yeah, I just don't, like the whole COVID thing really, I was really completely against like all of it, and it was the biggest regret of my life. But it's interesting that you were in the medical field and you sort of had similar opinions about pushing back against some of the stuff, like the
Mm-hmm.
mask mandates and the vaccine stuff, and I respect
Yeah.
that, because it must
Uh,
have been difficult in that industry.
yeah. I wasn't in the medical field at the time, um, but I had the background to give a perspective on it. But
Mm.
I mean, from what you just told me, I have to agree with the doctors. It sounds like it's just anxiety that you're manifesting into physical pain.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
could be like
I'm.
attacking your heart specifically, because you're
What is it?
probably, when you're going through those anxiety attacks, obviously your heart rate is rising significantly.
Yeah.
But then
I
you
mean,
said it kind of started after you
yeah, it
got the COVID
started
vaccine.
before. Yeah, it started. That's the thing. So like, I'm pretty logical. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not denying the influence of anxiety on
Yeah.
physical, like, and the physical manifestation. Um, but for me, like, I'm pretty logical and attentive. Like, I was trying to recognize patterns, go through the history, and see like what had happened and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I very initially started getting the pain all on the left side, which honestly lasted for years,
Yeah.
uh, that um, and that's only really recently sort of subsided, weirdly. But I didn't have anxiety then. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
actually worried. So that's kind of where I question it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, it was always like, and this is what I always say to the doctors, that
Yeah.
for me, the anxiety is a consequence of it, not a cause. Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
that was sort of create like I've developed it 100%. I've got probably like severe anxiety, which I can't really control, which sounds really like very beta, but like I can't help it. Like I don't want to be like that. It just happened, man. But uh, I developed that and health anxiety as a consequence of like this really severe pain that I was getting for a long time that I couldn't get to the bottom of. And obviously over time I got really stressed about it, and I did
Oh
get
yeah.
worried about it because I just couldn't get to the bottom of it. And I think like that just over like when you're exposed to that level of stress and worry over time, you probably will develop anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And like now it's almost like uh what would the expression be? You can't turn back now,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Now,
Yeah.
now that that's kind of water under the bridge. Like I will never be able to get back to a pre-anxiety stage. I don't think. Now I know
Mm-hmm.
like how it. The only thing I can do now is to like uh, recognize the symptoms and try to challenge it and
Yeah.
try to suppress it as much as I can. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'll ever return to a pre-anxiety state. It's kind of like now my body knows what those sensations are. It's like it's always got the potential to trigger and just be
Yeah.
like this mental anxiety attack, which like just comes out of nowhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Well, I do think that getting back into working out and eating healthier will help that. Another
yeah,
thing, and I don't know if you've tried it yet, whenever you do have those like anxiety attacks and get that pain and stuff, you should try writing it, like you may not be able to in the moment, but when it's over and it's past, try writing down every single detail you can. Document it exactly, like, this is what I was doing when it happened, and this is how I got through it, and write all of that
Okay.
down, time, date, and that way when you do go back to the doctor, you can show them all this stuff.
Yeah,
Because when
that's a
you're
good
just
idea.
telling them stuff, oh, it happened on this day and that,
Yeah, yeah,
it'll
I
give
know what
them
you
a
mean.
lot
Yeah,
better perspective
and
of what was going
yeah,
on.
because they can sort of see. They can. It's easy to visualize it because I
Mm-hmm.
understand. Like if you're just telling them a story and it includes multiple dates from, say, for instance, so like they're not really going to remember that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So and they're not going to be able to like diagnose it or help because of that. So yeah, no, that's good advice. I will take that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I'm learning to deal with it
Mm-hmm.
more. And I definitely the working out like that. That's always been a big catalyst for me for like um having like good because it
Yeah.
really gives you good structure and it just triggers something that you want to do it more. Like once you've done one, and like I would say that to anyone that
Mm-hmm.
like it could literally be the smallest exercise, like bit of exercise you could think of to just like be a huge catalyst for change in your life. Like you could say,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do 5 press ups. And you do 5 press ups. It doesn't even matter if they're in one go. And you do that on
Yeah.
the Monday. And you're like, right, I'm going to wait. And then you next day, you're going to be like, because you haven't done it for years or whatever, be the most overweight person in the world. I mean, it might be more, you might have to think of a different exercise, but you'll be aching. And then you just plan to do it on another day. If you can't do it that day, you put it off. But then you do another five
Mm-hmm.
on another day, and then you'll have like say a bit less time in between. You'll be like, right, I'll put that down for another day, and you will get the bug so quickly
Oh yeah.
that um like how that then manifests in terms of like motivation for every other part of your life
Mm-hmm.
is just huge. It is actually huge. I'm not saying it's exactly like that for every single person or exactly the same, but I would say for the majority of people, yeah, man, that is like a full on amazing way um, to sort of like be a catalyst for change kind of thing in your life. If you're
Oh yeah.
down in the dumps or you need motivation for exercise, great route
Mm-hmm.
for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you exercise? Do you like work out? Do you exercise? Do you do
Um,
any sports?
when I was younger, I always worked out and I played sports. I played basketball, baseball.
Oh,
But then
nice.
after I graduated high school, um, I started working at a prison, and it was a very laid back job where you didn't do a lot of
Okay.
exercise just within it. Um,
Yeah.
and so I did gain a little bit of weight at that time.
Mhm.
But then I started working another job, which I can't say where I work anymore because I got doxxed and a bunch of liberals tried to get me fired. It didn't work. I kept my
Wow.
job.
How?
They
What?
sided with me. Um,
Okay.
so I
Yeah.
can't,
Fair
I
enough.
don't want to
So
say
they.
where I work anymore, but I
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
in a
No. No.
very
Yeah.
physically active job.
Okay. Yeah. No. For
And
sure.
so I
I
lost
wonder if it
weight.
is.
Just, I basically have to do a pretty decent workout at my job. And then,
Okay.
but then a while back, I did get pretty heavy. I'm about 6'4", and I
Okay.
always floated about around where you were, about 170, 180 pounds. But then I got up to like 210 at one point, but then I came back down just through the job, and then I gained a bunch of weight when I was an alcoholic. It kind of does that.
Yeah. No.
You
I
hold
get
a
that.
lot of
Yeah.
weight that way. And then
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
diet was awful. I was eating fast food almost every meal,
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
just like enough. Like I was a glutton. I would go there and eat until I was full, and then eat more.
Yeah. I
It
kind of still have that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was mostly just because when I was in high school and playing sports, I was on like a 5 to 6,000 calorie diet just because I was working out Monday through Friday, playing sports, running, doing all that. So I was working all of it off. But then I
Yeah.
kept that going and but didn't keep up the exercise. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I gained a bunch of
And
weight, but now I'm down to about 200. right about where you are. And
Okay.
I work out
Yeah,
intermittently.
that's really good.
It's not all the time, but I do intermittently, and I was for a
It,
while doing it at least 2 times a week, but now I've gotten to the point where it's intermittent because everyone said, you know, Trump was going to get in office and our economy was going to collapse and all this other stuff. But
that was always nonsense, to be honest.
yeah,
But
ever since Trump got in office, my job is directly related to consumerism, and
yeah.
we've only gotten busier. So I just don't have the time, which it's kind of a cop out too. But I'm also doing more workouts at work too.
Yeah, I mean, you don't
So
have to justify it to me as long as
mhm,
it's like working for you.
yeah,
Like
I'm eating
it doesn't
so
really.
much healthier now. Like,
It
and
is hard though. Like that
mhm,
is hard, and like, I mean, the UK is hard, but like in the US, it's even harder. Just there's so many factors influencing your diet over there.
mhm,
That like again, people will judge Americans for that kind of stuff and judge like
yeah,
your whole society on it, but like they don't really take into account all of the different factors influencing it.
mhm.
I would be huge if I lived in the States, man. I would like your food is incredible.
It's
Like
amazing. I love
don't
eating food.
listen. Yeah, don't listen to sort of like the snobby, sort of like classist kind of like European people that are like, oh yeah, Italian. No, American food is like the fucking
Oh,
bomb. That's why people are big because it tastes so
mhm.
good. Like they've got
Oh yeah.
amazing fusion. Like obviously health wise, you can question like fast food and stuff, but
Mhm.
there's reasons for that. Like the country's massive. It's not like you have shops within walking distance and stuff. Like it's obviously very road centric, car
Yeah.
centric and stuff. So like you have to drive somewhere,
Mhm.
which means you're not exercising as much. Which means like produce might not be as easily available to get fresh and stuff. Which means you have like to have more preservatives and like there's like so much
Yeah.
to it that
Mhm.
uh, it really influences the whole nation's diet. And that like I can totally understand why it would be difficult to resist that when you're in the States because I would be like pigging out all of the time and like yeah probably verging on being a glutton like I
Oh yeah.
probably am now and like I wish I like I know that's in your eyes or in the eyes of Christianity or whatever that is a sin and
Mhm.
I don't know if I would go that far but potentially agree with that like I need to figure that out. It's a really difficult habit to stop
Mhm. Yeah.
like really difficult. Because I comfort like during this whole period as well, I was like properly comfort eating, and like before,
Mhm.
I'd play football or soccer, like, and I was like actually went through a skateboarding phase. I played pretty much most sports, or like the European like sports and UK sports and stuff. We didn't really play basketball and baseball, but we played football or what you'd call soccer. Definitely football, and like cricket or tennis.
Yeah.
Athletics, rugby, uh, and like, I was really like fit and active and healthy all the time. And but like obviously when I did the same thing, like stopped in your metabolism. You just
Mhm.
it's not the same as you get older as well. There's just so many factors. But I was comfort eating during that whole COVID period, which I never had a problem, I guess, when I was doing all of that exercise with weight, and I perhaps didn't have sympathy for people that are bigger, and
Yeah.
they still have individual agency. Like I'm not condoning people that need a crane to get out of their bed. Like
Yeah.
those people should have rectified that
Mhm.
situation long before, and they don't really have my sympathy.
Yeah.
People that are actually just generally fat and obese or whatever, like um, they don't have full sympathy. They have individual agency. They should change, and they can
Mhm.
change it.
Yep.
But they do have my sympathy in regards to or in respect to they, it's difficulty. It is very tough. Like it
Yeah.
is actually really tough, and depending on what is driving those desires, if it's comfy eating like mine, or boredom eating, like because you've not got something that's keeping you
Yeah.
occupied and motivating you,
Mhm.
like that's huge, man. That's huge, and it just it's like a whole positive feedback loop where like or like like snowball effect where it influences everything, and then that influences more bad eating, and that influences something
Yep.
else, and it's tough to get out of, man. So yeah, I respect you for sort of saying like you put on some weight and getting out of it, because anybody that does ever, even to some small degree, is it's an achievement. It's a real
Mm-hmm.
achievement.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just a realization for me. It was the same thing with like the alcoholism. And I wouldn't even so much say I was like an alcoholic as in like a way that I was addicted to it, because quitting it was easy. It was just realizing that, oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm having 2 or 3 beers every night, and every weekend
Hmm.
I'm drinking a handle of Jack Daniels. It's like I just realized
Yeah,
like, oh, the reason why I feel so shitty all the time is because I'm
is
drinking
that,
all
yeah.
this and I'm eating all this food. So it was somewhat easy. Obviously, I still want to do it. I still want to go stop at Taco Bell on the way home and just eat as much as I can. But
Yeah.
I
Do
choose
you
to
ever
eat
let it?
healthier.
Do you ever give yourself like a cheat day or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that?
Yeah,
Or
I definitely do. Once a week, me and my wife, every um, we eat at home pretty much every day except for one night a week. We will go out and eat fast food
okay,
or at a restaurant, and we'll eat. Just
yeah, yeah,
let yourself do that, and then you can say, okay, I let myself do that, but now tomorrow I'm gonna pick up my cross, and you know we're gonna be back to it. So
get back on stuff. Yeah, yeah. No, that's. The only problem I have with like cheat days and stuff is that like it's 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 tempting,
mm-hmm.
and that sort of temptation is dangerous. You know,
Yes.
because it's like obviously if you're very self disciplined, then you can resist it, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've got that self-discipline with food at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, I know I don't actually because I'm not at the level that you are yet. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm still susceptible to just those like off the cuff choices, which are
Yeah.
terrible for me, where I'll just go and just buy loads of bad food and eat loads of it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the
But
same thing
I,
with like drug addicts. Like you could use
yeah,
meth or cocaine for 10 years, and then you get off of it and you take like 3 months off, but then the second you're like, oh, I'm just gonna do it once, and then you're right
and
back
that's
on the
it.
bandwagon.
Yeah, yeah, and that is habits are weird, man.
Mm-hmm.
I it's almost like it's a I'm not saying bad habits are a natural thing, but habits in general are it's almost like people need to have a habit.
Yeah.
It's just how it manifests. So like you could have a work habit and it's still going to have some potentially negative downsides or like negative effects or downsides, sorry, to it, but it's going to have some positives. Whereas like obviously say taking drug like having a drug habit, it's going
Mm-hmm.
to have more negative side effects than it does
Yeah.
or consequences than it does positive ones. And like so I guess I don't know, maybe everybody has habits, maybe every
Mm-hmm.
single person has a habit, it's just not
Yeah.
necessarily a bad one.
Yep.
It could be just something that is actually beneficial to you. So um, a lot of the time it feels like somebody seeking something, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like to occupy them or to give them a sense of worth or like a
Yeah.
it's like filling a void in a weird way. And like that would go for my say like my boredom eating. Like that is
Yeah.
that's fulfilling that lack of fulfillment and lack of stimulation. So boredom, I'll eat. Um, so like if I can find something to replace that, something good, then perhaps that's like the way forward. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
like with your like alcoholism and stuff, perhaps you've just replaced it with something that was just better for you.
Yeah. The thing I replaced drinking with was smoking weed,
Okay.
and I did that for a while. And it was much better for me than
Yeah.
drinking, but I've
Well,
given
like
that up too.
yeah. Did you replace that with something?
No, um, I haven't, but I do. I will say that
Like
that's.
what would you say now that you're using time that for like instead of smoking weed?
I mean, I kind of. Hmm. Well, I liked just smoking weed when I'm like I said, I do writings and stuff, and so I like to do that while I was writing.
Okay.
and I liked to do it while I was researching things, and
Okay.
it's
Okay.
obviously a fun thing to do when you're with friends
Yeah.
and stuff.
But like you must have replaced. It, I guess what I'm saying is that like something else must have like what has changed then since you've stopped doing that? Like how has your life improved like tangibly?
I mean, my life was improving while I was on weed. So weed was like the replacement for my bad habits, and so now I've just made better habits. And
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just think like obviously, for instance, say you were smoking weed and like it was obviously an improvement on alcohol, but it's still not perfect.
mm-hmm.
And then like the next step is say like I don't know, you just go off weed and you don't necessarily directly replace it, but your work life completely improves, or you're like much more productive, or you're healthier because you're eating better. Um, like those things might not have directly replaced it, but they kind of have replaced it
Mm-hmm.
in a roundabout way. Obviously, not in terms of like the habit thing about, but there is still some void um, that you have filled with something else that's
Yeah,
good. You know, do you
I
see what
think
I
to
mean?
kind of answer your question, I think I've realized that I don't need to fill that void anymore. And I think that's what weed kind of helped me realize
Okay.
was I was using
Okay, yeah,
alcohol
that's
to
an
fill a
interesting
void,
take.
and then
Yeah.
it's obviously I'm not one of the people that say that like weed isn't addictive. I think any drug is addictive, and I think almost anything is addictive. Like your work can be addictive, or
Yeah.
playing video games can be addictive. Working out can be
Yeah.
addictive. Like you can even see
Yeah.
people who overwork out to the point where it kills them.
100%.
So,
100%. Even if it doesn't kill them, it can still be
mm-hmm,
like an obsession, like an addictive obsession is not good for you.
mm-hmm. So I think it just helped me realize that. I think that kind of answers your question.
Yeah. No, I was just yeah, I was just interested because it's just I mean it's not like a fully fleshed out theory that I had about like habits and addictions and stuff.
Yeah.
But I quite like when I have these sorts of conversations where like you're just sort of exploring ideas,
Mm-hmm.
you can like think of something, you're like, oh, maybe that makes sense, and I just thought I'd just let it out and
Yeah.
see what you thought of it. But
Mm-hmm.
it is yeah, it's interesting because that sort of conversation, like I had a conversation with a stoner, an Aussie guy that I played games with. There, he's a lovely guy.
Yeah.
He's a bit liberal for me, but he
Mm-hmm.
still is. He still is like lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And but we have like some deep conversations about like similar stuff to what me and you were talking about when we've
Yeah.
like got like spiritual, like because he does like DMT and things like that,
Ooh,
and
yeah.
I'm kind of like maybe interested in the science behind that and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. And I kind of feel like to like elevate ourselves or to like a level of like enlightenment that is um sort of not worthy of say like God or whatever, but is above like our base level. It it kind of feels like one of the prerequisites to that is really resisting all of your innate human
Yeah.
desires, like every single innate one that you've. Um, it's kind of like, for instance, like if there's a lion out in the savannah of Africa, like it's got its natural urges and innate desires. It to reproduce. It wants to feed.
Mm-hmm.
Wants to sleep. And it might want to fight off like competitors. Um, say that like their innate human desires, or innate sort of animalistic desires, and like I was like, we were talking about it, and we were sort of thinking like, well, what separates us from
Yeah.
those things? Like, it's not necessarily the fact that we don't have um, those innate desires. It's more like we have uh, more ability to sort of we can consider them,
Mm-hmm.
and we have like
the ability to rationalize and like make choices and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, so we're almost like on a higher consciousness and than what they are, you know, like in terms of like uh how can I really explain it? It was just basically in the context, sorry, of like this consciousness being on a spectrum and like how we're higher up on the spectrum. And I always said to him, I always said that I don't think we're like the pinnacle of that spectrum. I think that the ultimate is what I'd consider God, but
Yeah.
maybe not in the same sense as you, but would be the pinnacle of that spectrum. You know, at the top end, it's naive and narcissistic to think that we're at the very top end of the spectrum if consciousness is on a spectrum. And I think, again, like, I don't know if science would prove that, but logic would kind of back that up. And I guess that was when we were talking about that sort of like those innate desires and stuff. It was in that kind of context we were sort of saying like, well, why, what, like if I was just going around like shagging everything and like eating everything, like you'd actually like in your faith kind of say that's bad.
Yep.
And that's because you're like those innate desires kind of like, you know, you kind of like almost like making yourself just like the animal then, you know, like it's like you can't control those innate desires and urges. But what makes us not like them is that we have the ability to like consider it and not do it, you know, like it's not like it completely controls us.
Yeah.
So like it kind of feels like that next level of like sort of is to be able to resist all of those sort of innate desires and stuff. And like eating is one of those things. I obviously an enlightened enough individual reached the point where I'm not greedy, but and a bit of a glutton. But I hope to one day get to that point. I don't know. What do you think about that in terms of comparison to like animals and innate desires and stuff? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do kind of agree with you there. It's definitely something I've wrestled with before too. Because it's just like, I do think that like animals like are conscious and like they are aware of things that are going on, but they don't, like you said, they don't really have an ability to like introspect, to look in on themselves and be like, why did I do that? They just act on their animal instincts. Yet we are able to introspect, and it's things like bees build beehives and beavers build dams, but they've been doing that for thousands or probably tens of thousands, maybe even millions of years.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it any differently. But humans, we always are innovating, and we build skyscrapers and we build long roads and connect things, and we build atom bombs. Like, you know, animals don't do that. So there is kind of and I think that's what a lot of Christianity tells you, is to kind of like deny that animalistic
It is,
behaviors.
It is, yeah.
Because that's just what all of sin is: lust, greed, gluttony. That's
it
all just
is,
giving into your instincts.
This is just totally like aligning with like my sort of trajectory towards being religious, to be honest. It's crazy because I do truly believe that like the to be enlightened is to be able to resist that. That's like what distinguishes you from being like on a lower level of that sort of consciousness spectrum.
Yeah.
Like, because obviously a human that doesn't resist all of those urges, that like just has those urges and acts on them, is still probably on a higher level of the sort of consciousness spectrum than say a dog, or even be lower like an ant.
Yeah.
But you would have to consider those people potentially lower on the spectrum than say the ones that do resist some of those urges. And then there should be people above it that perhaps have reached like a higher level of consciousness where they like
it's kind of like
them. They know like they're not beneficial to them in every scenario, kind of thing.
Do you listen to Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
Yeah, he kind of talks about like our brains, and I think he gets that from Terrence McKenna. possibly.
Okay.
He says like our brains are kind of like antennas that are tuning into things. And whenever
Mm-hmm.
you turn that dial on the radio to the right channel and you can hear clearly, what you're kind of doing is tuning into your true consciousness and becoming like right with the spirit and
Mm.
with you're fully receiving like God's kind of like I guess signals that he's sending to you.
Yeah.
And so that's like becoming enlightened. And whenever you go off and you indulge in those instincts and stuff, you're separating yourself from God. And that's what the Bible says is sin separates
Mm.
you from God. But then doing stuff like working out every day, taking care of your body, because the Bible says your body's a temple. And so you take care of your body and you don't eat too much and you work out and you don't take more than you need and you're just right with the people around you, and then you're
Yeah.
tuning into a higher consciousness, and it's definitely weird.
It's weird as well because if you actually think about it, like tuning into your consciousness or resisting those animalistic urges, actually it does actually reward you.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not coming at this. You can come at this from the Christian angle,
Yeah.
but I'm just coming at it from like a logical angle, which you can sort of see I'm trying to sort of like highlight the connections between your like
Yeah.
religious sort of doctrine or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and the actual rationale behind this argument. Like those things do actually reward you. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you were to have sex with every female that you saw, that isn't gonna reward you. Like, or if you were to
Mm-hmm.
eat everything that you see, like you get overweight. That isn't actually
Yep.
that's negatively impacting you. If you resist it and you do treat your body well, you eat healthily and you exercise, you are actually rewarded. So like that kind of just goes hand in hand with like what you um and like your religion would say, and it's kind of uh eye-opening actually, to be
Oh
honest,
yeah.
to think about it like that, because I guess because of the way your religion itself uh presented in terms of its language, in terms of like how people dress and like the places they worship in and stuff, like you can kind of miss the point actually. And if you just
Mm-hmm.
look at the fundamental message, um, then it does actually kind of resonate with like reality. Uh,
Yeah.
as in, that's actually crazy. It's actually crazy. I'm so conflicted with that. I'm so that
Mm-hmm.
makes me so conflicted because I do honestly truly believe super consciousness.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no doubt about it in my, and like in all intents and purposes, that is a god. That kind of is a god.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, and then when I start thinking about like the whole like good and evil thing about, and like I've been thinking about like how like cooperation, like everything that's bad or evil, so to speak, actually results is like the least efficient sort of way for sort of survival and progress. Like evil is like the antithesis to that. Whereas if
Mm-hmm.
like good stuff, inherently good stuff, so like cooperation and fairness and kindness, that is actually that leads to more human progression and say like better, I don't know, better chance of survival or better prosperity. So like it's actually like that if you look at it, like good is actually a force in the universe that leads to better
Yeah.
outcomes. So in that respect, it's kind of like that's the path that you're meant to follow within the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is sort of what is intended. I don't know. I just think it's really weird. Like I think I'd have to probably like come up with some sort of like really coherent sort of theory on it and like write
Mm-hmm.
and stuff, because it is a bit fragmented, but
Yeah.
well, very fragmented. So
Yeah,
I
it's-
apologize for that, but it is wild. It is wild because even if you're not religious like you,
Mm-hmm.
if you're logical and rational, you might well actually, yeah. There's a lot going for the sort of theory that there's a God. There is a lot going for it. A lot going for
Yeah.
it, and it's not just about having blind faith. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
logic and rationale and science that kind of does point towards something like that.
Yeah.
So that's why when you said atheists are like the the worst in terms of like their outlook, even compared to other religions, they're the most wrong. You said, I think.
Yeah.
That is true. What you're saying, that is a true statement because, uh, like they're like closed off. They're closed-minded. Like
Yeah.
they're what they're like they think they've reached the limit of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
How naive is that to think that
Yeah.
there's so much that we don't know?
Yeah.
But
Every
to
atheist,
clearly
like,
make a blind statement to say like that's blind faith, they know for sure that there's not God. That is so. That comes from such like that like materialistic kind of movement.
mm-hmm.
That like sort of consumerist movement. Like they just think like, yeah, they're just a clump of cells and that's it, and they
Yeah.
die and they rot and that's it. And
Just a bunch of chemical reactions and
yeah, and the universe has no meaning,
mm-hmm.
like because that's essentially what they're saying, and that
Yeah.
that is so ridiculously like naive. I can't even really think of the term that would do that justice, but it is so
Mm-hmm.
naive and so like glass half empty, even more pessimistic than that. Such a sort of short-sighted outlook, I think. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean they have to embrace God. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. It just have an open mind. You don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying, crazy. To call yourself an atheist is really insane.
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
Yeah. Every time I get like in conversations with atheists, they just go, well, prove God. Like, prove God is real. And I say, well, read the Bible. And they say, well, I don't accept that. Okay, so you're just going to deny literally only evidence. And to me, it's just like saying, oh, gravity doesn't exist because I don't trust Albert Einstein's theory of relativity.
yeah.
And that's
I
probably
guess
not
they
a
would
great comparison, but it's,
no, but I see what you're saying. I guess yeah, they like from like playing devil's advocate, they'd say that like obviously they have experiments to prove it,
mm-hmm.
which is true.
Yeah.
But the thing is that like to declare that God doesn't exist is just as in my opinion, and no, I mean no offense by this, but it's just as bad, or it's exactly the same as declaring with 100% certainty that he does exist or they do exist.
Mm-hmm.
To claim that you know when there's so much that we don't know is absurd, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And where the way I'd side with your argument more so is that at least yours gives meaning to the universe,
mm-hmm.
to existence. And I refuse to accept that there is not meaning to
Yeah.
this. It might not be the meaning that you ascribe to, which
mm-hmm.
is fine.
Yeah.
I accept that people are going to have differences in how they sort of attach meaning to the universe, but to attach no meaning to it at all, that it's just random, chemical, inert, I don't know, whatever. Like that is that's just absolutely ridiculous. Honestly, that is ridiculous. That really just makes me think that's just absurd. And like those people haven't thought about it enough. They haven't actually considered like the bigger questions. I think that is indicative of people that that's a tribal thing. I actually think like when I think about it in depth, like there, I'm thinking, how would you come to the conclusion that you're an atheist? Well, it means one, you haven't considered all of the bigger questions because that or most likely that you have lots of the fundamental, profound questions that exist.
Yeah.
But it also means that like you still have that that sort of desire to belong to a group, because that's kind of like, so like when they say they're an atheist, belong to that group of people, and they can like relate to those people, and it's kind of like a a bit of a tribe, and people need that. And it's kind of like without something like, say, religion, which gives you a sense of meaning and community and stuff, like what do they have? So one of those ways to give them some sort of sense of identity is to say, I'm an atheist. But to me, that just smacks of somebody that hasn't really considered everything.
Yeah.
And like I said, I would, if they said agnostic, then I'd respect them way more than if they said they're an atheist. I don't actually really respect atheism at all. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense in any way. I respect people that are religious way more than what I do atheists. And I respect people that say they're agnostic way more, because at least those people are thinking about the profound questions.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
For today. I definitely enjoyed talking to you.
Sorry I rambled.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm sorry I rambled, man.
It's definitely fun talking to you
when you get into these things. Yeah, same. Really enjoyed it. It was nice to meet you, Austin. Like,
yes, it's good to meet you, Rory.
You're good at what you do.
Thank you.
I wish you, as much success as possible. I know you said you're not necessarily doing it for success, which I also respect, but still, it doesn't, just I don't just mean this, but just in life in general. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It was wicked.
Yeah, and I hope you can get that problem figured out with your heart, and at least get it narrowed down to something. I think the working out and writing stuff down will definitely help.
I'll definitely take that advice on board for sure. With regards to writing it down, I haven't necessarily heard anybody suggest that. It's usually just doctors trying to give you an assortment of random pills.
Yeah,
which I don't usually take. So yeah, I'll try what you suggested.
All right.
Appreciate that.
I'm gonna end this with a quote. I'm gonna try to start doing that at the end of my episodes. So this is a quote from the Federalist Paper 10 by James Madison. It is, "It could never be more truly said than of the first remedy that it was worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an ailment without which it instantly expires. But it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life, because it imparts to fire its destructive agency." And with that, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Rory, for coming on.
No props.